Hi guys, this is Shadow. Join our Patreon and have access to tons of novels and hundreds of hours of audiobooks. Also, by selecting a tier monthly, you can request any novel you want and I can turn it to audiobook for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy.
Chapter 226. The Celestial Chorus, 3. The room was silent. Hardly any sound could be heard besides the subtle, and yet strained sound of the people's breaths within the room. I sat in my corner staring at the scene with a blank look. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and as I lowered my head, my gaze fell on the small vial that was attached to my arm. It was 3/4 of the way filled. A thought ran down my mind as I recalled the scene from before. 3 lives. Each quarter of the vial signified a life. Given that I had 3/4, it meant that I only had 3 lives. I licked my parched lips. For some reason, I felt like these were going to be far from enough. Death. I had already died once. And yet, I had a feeling I was going to experience it again. More than once at that. It will take a while for those that the blood has baptized to wake up again. We, of the Celestial Chorus, can wait. In the meantime, gathering the attention of all those present was the man dressed in white as he looked around, his white eyes sweeping every corner of the room. This has been enough for the demonstration. You can go back to your own chambers. I will be calling you each individual to take the trial of the Forgotten Minds. Trial of the Forgotten Minds? I frowned at the words that came out of his mouth but wasn't able to further understand what they meant as he turned around and proceeded to leave the premises. Following the man's disappearance, several people dressed in white entered the room, dragging the ones who had fallen on the floor and bringing them out of the room. I could only sit and watch as they were dragged away out of the room. I thought about asking what was going on, or for some sort of explanation, but I remained quiet, watching everything from the side. There were still many things that I wasn't aware of, like how the man in white had managed to kill those people or what was going on. But if there was one thing that I understood, it was that I needed to comply, at least until I figured out what was going on. A man soon stopped in front of me. Looking up, my eyes met his gaze. There was a lost, hollow look in his blackened eyes as if he wasn't fully conscious. The emptiness within them sent a shiver down my spine, amplifying the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. But I had to push that feeling down. I knew that I couldn't let my fear take over my mind. At least not yet. Not until I had some sort of answer to the situation. The man turned around and left the room. Judging from his movements, he seemed to want me to follow him. I could only comply in silence. Coming out of the room, I looked around. The flickering torches cast eerie shadows on the rough walls, making it clear to me that we were deep within a cave system. Haha. Each breath echoed loudly within my mind, magnifying the oppressive silence. Lining the walls were towering, imposing rocky doors, their surfaces etched with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with a strange light. I stared at the symbols, feeling a creeping sense of confusion as I found myself unable to understand them. It's like a completely different language. In fact, pausing slightly, I came to a sudden realization. The language that I was speaking, what in the world was I speaking? I blinked my eyes as my mind momentarily blanked at the realization. What? I started thinking within my mind, and my heart froze at the realization that the language that I was using to speak to myself wasn't my native tongue, English. No, rather, I covered my mouth in shock. How was this possible? For me to speak an entirely different language than the one I was used to? Could it be that they've imparted memories inside of my mind during the experimentation? It was the only way to explain the sudden situation. Looking up and staring at the man in front of me, I wanted to talk to him, ask him about my situation, but again, I held myself back. I knew that it wasn't wise for me to speak. They would most likely not answer me anyway. I wasn't sure for how long we continued to walk. The cave system was rather large, and my legs were already starting to ache by the time it took us to reach the destination. Just like before, strange symbols appeared on the rocky door that stood in front of me. As the man pressed his large palm against the door, the symbols glowed, and the door started to rumble. Rumble, rumble. I watched as the doors lifted upwards, revealing an empty room behind. The process continued for the next few seconds before finally stopping. That was when the man looked at me and I entered the room. As I entered the room, I looked around the place before turning back to look at the man. His hollow eyes looked back at me. He had no expression on his face as he remained firm on the spot. It was as if he was a mindless puppet with no thoughts. But if there was one thing that stood out to me, it was the golden insignia on his shirt. It depicted a large eye sitting at the top of a golden triangle. The company responsible for this? Rumble. My thoughts were broken by another rumbling. Looking up, I saw the doors slowly coming to a close. I thought things would just end there when all of a sudden, The man's eyes started to shake. The way he looked at me also started to change, and I felt a noticeable change in the atmosphere around me. Weird noises started to come out of his mouth all of a sudden. What? Are you trying to say something? What? I didn't understand at all what he was saying or trying to say. Nonetheless, I could tell that he was trying to speak to me. For that reason, I moved forward to get a better understanding of what he was trying to say. He can't hear you. What is it? HGK, He continued to speak, and I moved even closer. I only stopped right before the doors. I didn't dare step out. Rumble. The rumbling of the doors was making it hard for me to fully grasp what he was trying to say. What are you trying to say? His body started to tremble all of a sudden. For some reason, the sight made my heart freeze, a cold lump forming in my throat. I was just about to speak again when I noticed something flicker at the corner of his eyes. It was black. A black tear? The sight shook me as I held myself rooted on the spot. The strange situation didn't end there. Following the black tear, his eyes began to transform. It was as if an ink brush had been placed directly at his pupils, spreading an inky darkness that clouded his vision. His body convulsed violently, each tremor more intense than the last, as the blackness consumed his eyes. Thump. I felt the sound of my own heartbeat echo loudly within my mind as all my muscles tensed. Just what is going on? I took a step back. The noises coming out of his mouth grew louder and louder, and I held my breath. The noises coming out of his mouth grew louder and louder, and rumble. Right now, my eyes were on the doors that were closing. If before I wanted them to remain open so that I could escape, my thoughts had completely changed. I wanted for them to close. The sight before me was too chilling. It was, run, a word. Finally, I was able to make out a word as the man's body shook completely. I swallowed my saliva as I looked at him. He was looking back at me now, his body eerily still. The only difference was that both of his eyes were now completely black, pools of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Run. Such were the last words I heard from him before the doors fully closed. Clank. What followed after was silence. A silence that was broken by two sounds. The sound of my breath. Thump. And the sound of my own heartbeat. I stood on the spot, unable to move as fear completely overtook my mind. I could hardly speak or think properly. It was as if I was in a scene straight from a horror movie. And as if things couldn't get any worse. Terror completely gripped my heart as I screamed my lungs out. What? Standing a few meters away from me was a pair of glaring red eyes. They looked at me with such intensity that made my blood freeze. But as my mind processed the situation, I soon realized something. An owl? Indeed, an owl. Blinking several times, I stared at it, unable to comprehend its appearance. It just stood there with its piercing red eyes, and as I looked into them, I found myself looking at my own reflection. Just what? What a terrible state. I jumped up again. Who? I looked around me in hopes of finding where the voice came from, but found myself unable to find anyone. A speaker? I looked towards the corners of the rooms for any cameras or speakers, but found nothing. Who was it that spoke? I continued to look around, but found nothing. Just as I was about to speak again, a figure hovered right before me, and my heart leaped out of my chest for the second time. As expected. You're different. It was the owl, and I found myself blinking several times. Am I going crazy? An owl speaking? A robot? What is that? It looks like someone has replaced him. Another voice echoed in the room, and my head flicked back to where a cat had appeared. This time, I wasn't as shocked as with the owl. I pretty much gave up on thinking I was sane. The cat looked at me directly. What is your name? I didn't answer immediately. I was struggling to understand the situation. But strangely, meeting the cat's eyes, I found my mouth opening on its own. Emmett. I answered while hastily covering my mouth. Emmett Rowe. The cat looked at me for a brief moment before turning to look at the owl. The next words that came out of its mouth shook me. You're right. He's a fake. Chapter 227. Trials of the Forgotten Minds 1. Leon felt dazed. Everything felt vague, and his mind blurred in and out of consciousness. What is going on? The scent of blood rushed into his mind, tickling his nose. He felt a certain pain in his neck. It hurt quite bad, but he still knew he was alive. The pain was certification of this. It was certification that he was still alive and only unconscious. The scenery within his mind changed. Leon found himself in a familiar forest. The trees were sparsely arranged, their slender trunks casting elongated shadows on the thin grass that barely covered the ground. He was quite familiar with the place, because he had grown up in this place. The Ivinus Barony. Swoosh! A blade cleaved down from above, aiming for his neck. Die. Just barely, Leon managed to avoid the blade. Turning his head, Leon's gaze fell upon a familiar figure in the distance. The man had jet black hair and piercing hazel eyes, standing tall with a sword in hand. The sight of him stirred a mixture of unease and something else that he couldn't quite explain. But he also appeared to be younger. Julian? Fuck, you're as slippery as always, bastard. Finally, Leon realized what was going on. This was a memory. A distant memory of his. Back when Julian had changed. You're my fucking servant. If I tell you to fucking did you die? Julian's expression was twisted. Something that Leon felt was quite foreign to him. He had grown so used to the expressionless Julian that the one before him felt weird. But this was the real Julian. Fuck, you cheap bastard. Julian glared at him. It had been a while since Leon had been glared like that by him. He almost missed such look of his. Leon watched as Julian lowered his head to stare at the sword in his hand. It wasn't a fancy sword, just a dummy that the two often used when sparring against each other in the morning. Of all people, why did it have to be you? Why were you the one who was born talented with the sword? There was clear resentment in Julian's gaze as he stared at the sword. Extending his hand, a magic circle floated at the top of his palm. This shitty curse magic. What good is it when there is a sword? Damn it. Julian cursed, his eyes flickering between madness and sanity. Ah shit. He ruffled his hair, glaring up ahead and extending his sword. Fucking die. He brought his hand forward, and purple hands manifested from beneath the ground, rendering Leon immobile. Leon could still remember how he had screamed back then, especially as he recalled the sword cleaving down on his neck, severing his neck completely. The pain matched exactly the pain that he currently felt. That was the memory of the first time Leon had died. Asterisk. Leon opened his eyes. He started to massage his neck. The pain was still there. Or perhaps it wasn't and he was just imagining it, but the pain felt so vivid in his mind. He got up and looked around him. He found himself sitting inside of a familiar cave and memories started to rush his mind. I died. Or at least he thought he did. But looking at his body, he realized that he was still fine. There were a couple of explanations for such a situation. Perhaps an illusion or that he had been revived. Leon took a deep breath. If it was an illusion, then everything was fine, but if that wasn't the case. Leon felt a sudden pain coming from his left arm. Turning his head, his gaze fell on the small vial attached to his arm and his expression froze for a split second. In particular, his gaze fell on the red liquid that pulsed within the tube. The dosage was less than it had been before. All sorts of thoughts ran through his mind before he finally closed his eyes. I see. He finally realized what had happened. So that's what happened. He wanted to laugh but found himself unable to do so. Where is this place? Once he knew what happened, he no longer felt as panicked. He looked around for a few seconds before no longer finding any interest in the place. He thought back at all the clues that he had managed to decipher so far, and an idea started to compound in his mind. Some sort of cult. Most likely another church that worships one of the 7 gods, but to a more extreme level. The 7 gods. There existed 7 main churches in the world. Regardless of the empire or kingdoms, the 7 churches existed everywhere. Their influence was far-reaching, and Leon was also a devoted believer in one of the churches. Or more specifically, one of the 7 gods. Mortem, the god of immortality. Ha. He laughed as he stared at the vial resting by his arm. He had a hunch before, but now he was certain. The blood of Mortem. Only his blood was capable of doing something like this. Leon knew all too well. He had experienced it before. Ripping off his clothes, Leon lowered his head to stare at his body. Ha. His laugh grew more pronounced at the sight that greeted him. Pulsing with life, he could see every single vein in his body. They glowed a strange blue glow. It looks like the accumulation from the previous dosage finally hit the mark. He brought his hand to his chest, clamping at his visible heart as he slowly pulled out a chalice from it. The chalice emitted a mysterious black glow as Leon stared at the liquid contained within. It pulsed with a rhythm disturbingly similar to the substance in the vial. Hesitantly, he brought the chalice to his lips and drank. Gulp. The moment the liquid entered his body, his veins pulsed with a greater glow, almost blinding everything that was around him. Power surged through his veins, and he could feel his strength rising, the newfound strength coursing through him. Closing his eyes, he opened his mouth as a euphoric feeling flooded the depths of his mind. I am a fake? I stood still while staring at the strange owl and cat that stood before me. The entire time they had been talking about things that I didn't quite understand. But if there was something that I understood, it was that they knew something that I didn't. Fake. They had been saying it for a while. Or more like, they were hinting at the fact that I wasn't supposed to belong to this body. What do you mean by that? Do you know what's going on? Are you too, perhaps? The owl remained quiet while it stared at me. It stayed like that for a few seconds before it finally opened its beak to speak. Your real name is Julian. Julian? Julian Dacre Ivinus. The strange owl corrected, giving me a full name. That was the name of the person that your body belongs to. For some reason, I felt my entire body shudder. The source of it all was the strange owl before me. Its voice was brittle and deep, reverberating through the cave with an unsettling resonance. As it spoke, I felt an involuntary twitch in my body, my head jerking slightly with each word it uttered. It was as if I was being entrapped into a sea of ice, slowly sinking deeper and deeper into it. The way it was looking at me, he might kill me. I swallowed my saliva. I had a deal with that human. The deal was something that I followed through with. But the owl stopped speaking, its gaze turning shaper and colder. I felt every hair on the situation started to become clear to me. What sort of fucked situation was this? I suddenly grew nervous. From what I understood, this was not my real body. I had taken the body of someone else. Julian whatever Evans. I refused to believe in such a possibility, but thinking about how my face changed, and my entire body too, the brutal reality was right before me. Ah fuck. I felt something rise within my chest at the realization. So if I took over the body of someone else, where exactly am I? What about? All sorts of thoughts started to run down my mind at that moment, numbing down the words that the owl was speaking. The fear that had previously gripped me vanished, and all I started to think about was one thing. Brother. What about my brother? You're starting to look more like him. I raised my head to stare at the owl. It looked back at me with its cold eyes. Starting to look like him? What did he mean by that? But you're still not the same. You don't show it. But I can see the fear hidden within the depths of your eyes. It's because of him that I've started to understand emotions better. But now that he's gone, I don't see how I should keep you alive. I blinked my eyes in silence. Since it was still speaking, then maybe there was still a chance that it wouldn't kill me. And as expected, it indeed was like that. The only reason I'm not killing you is because there's a chance he might come back. Whoever you are, know that the only reason you're still alive is because of him. If by the time I deem that is too long he still hasn't come back, I will end you in a heartbeat. I swallowed at its words. I could tell that the owl wasn't joking with regard to what it was saying, and I could only close my eyes and accept the situation. This body doesn't belong to me, and an owl is looking to kill me after it deems that too much time has passed. Great. How great. What a fucked up situation this was. With that being said, I will help you. I raised my head and looked at the strange owl. There's another possibility that I haven't taken into account yet. Another possibility? Yes. The owl looked at the cat, which stared back at him. After a while, it also nodded. It's possible. The owl nodded slightly, turning its eyes back to me. There's a possibility that you didn't take over a body. Instead, you lost your memories. Ah? I blinked my eyes repeatedly, unable to understand what it was trying to say. Lost my memories? No, that's impossible. I was quick to shut such thoughts down. There was no way. I could still vividly recall everything as if it had been a few seconds ago, and it was just impossible. I refused to believe such a possibility. You might think it is, but I do not believe so. You may be a different person, but your soul still feels the same. As a will, I can tell. What? More unfamiliar terms flowed out of the owl's mouth, and I pursed my lips. Taking several breaths to calm myself down, I closed my eyes and took one deep breath. Okay. I opened my eyes again, staring back at the owl. You said that you will help me, right? Correct. I see. The whole story about me losing my memories, I didn't believe at all. Nonetheless, I decided to run along with it and stopped questioning it. I needed to find answers to my situation, and the owl seemed to know something. For that reason, the wisest move was run along with it. Yeah, until I figure something out. As if it could read my thoughts, the owl's gaze remained firmly locked onto me. I didn't care and just nodded at it. He'll cooperate with you. That was when I opened my mouth to ask. He'll do that. But how should I call you? The owl looked back at me before turning to look at the cat who curled over on its own. Then, staring back at me, it opened its beak to say, Almighty. I blinked my eyes, trying to make sure that I hadn't heard wrong. But I didn't. The silence that suddenly took over the place was an affirmation of it. Then, staring at the owl and seeing that it wasn't joking, I felt something rise from deep within my chest. Something sinister. Something. PFTT. Chapter 228. Trials of the Forgotten Minds, 2. Immediately after I laughed, I hastily covered my mouth and looked at the owl who was looking at me with squinted eyes. A strange silence took over the surroundings. It wasn't funny. I tried to play it off, but the cat gave me no chance. That was a laugh. It then turned to look at the owl, a smirk slowly creeping up on its lips. It didn't say anything, but from its gaze it looked to be gloating. The owl merely glanced at it before expressing what seemed to be contempt. "You're one to talk, Pebble." The cat froze, and so did I. I hastily held onto my chest and suppressed the twitch on my face. What in the world is this? My face repeatedly twitched. It only got worse when both the owl and the cat turned to look at me. It was as if they were daring me to laugh. But I didn't. Persevered. Biting my lips until they started to bleed, I kept my face firm. Thinking about it, the fact that I was trying to hold my laugh against a cat and an owl showed just how far gone I was. The realization was what truly calmed me down, and I took a deep breath. "You have very interesting names." "My name is only temporary," the cat said while glaring at me. Then, standing on 2 feet, its voice deepened. "But don't let that fool you. I am an almighty dragon." "A dragon?" I blinked my eyes while looking at the cat, trying to make itself look imposing. Certainly tried, but I just found it strangely adorable. On the other hand, the owl watched from the side as it opened its beak to speak. "I am a tree." "A what?" My head flicked in its direction. Meeting its 2 piercing red eyes, I asked again to make sure that I hadn't heard wrong. "You said you were a tree?" "Correct." "Oh." I pinched the middle of my brows. So not only the cat, but the dog had lost it. No, in the first place, I'm the one who has lost it. At the thought, I started to ruffle my hair and tried to make sense of the entire situation. So, I am inside of the body of someone else that I don't know. A strange owl and cat appear to know the previous Bodis owner, and they're saying that there's a chance that I might have lost my memories, but I doubt that's the case. Or maybe not. Thinking about the names of the owl and the cat, I found myself thinking that perhaps their hypothesis wasn't wrong. Of course, there's also the chance that I'm just imagining those two. If that was the case, then that hypothesis was out of the window. But seriously, almighty, Pebble? Amazing. Until we figure out what is going on, we will be keeping you alive. Attracting my attention was the owl's voice as it looked at me. Then, as if realizing something, it asked, "Do you know how to use your powers?" "Powers? What powers?" The owl and the cat turned to look at each other. They stood in silence for a brief moment before the cat spoke. "If he's lost his memories, then he shouldn't be able to." "Yes. What are you two talking about? Powers? Were they talking about powers like those people in the comics had?" "Nah, no way, right?" Without saying a word, the cat stepped forward. I stared at it in confusion, but before I could say anything, I suddenly felt something heavy press against my shoulders. My back started to hunch down as breathing started to become more difficult. Opening my eyes widely, I stared at the harmless-looking cat as it coldly looked down on me. "You have powers, human." This deep voice echoed loudly within my mind. The previous body was quite powerful. Far from as powerful as me, but a respectable strength. The two of us are active wills that exist within the body that you have taken. KH. Despite the pressure that was bearing down on me, I continued to listen to each word that the cat spoke. "You have not lost your powers. I can feel it. You may have forgotten how to use them, but they are still within you." As the cat's words faded, the pressure that was bearing down on me also started to fade. Haha. Breathing heavily, I looked up at the cat. There were several things that I wanted to ask, but stopped when I noticed the owl's gaze on me. I found myself unable to talk as I lost myself in those creepy red eyes. It was its voice that shook me out of it. "Try saying status." They were the words the human used to say to open up that strange window. "I wonder if it also works with you." I looked at the owl in confusion, but after a few seconds, I gathered myself and did as I was told. Though I had no clue about what it was saying, I also had no clue about everything else that it said. For that reason, I complied. Opening my mouth, I mumbled, "Status." That was when a change occurred as my eyes widened. Appearing right before was a large luminescent window, and my heart skipped a beat. Julian D. Iviness. Level 35. Tier 3 Magician. EXP. As 0%, 11%, 100%. Profession. Magician. Type. Elemental Curse. Type. Mind. Emotive. Spells. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Anger. Superior type spell. Emotive. Sadness. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Fear. Intermediate type spell. Emotive. Happiness. Intermediate type spell. Emotive. Disgust. Advanced type spell. Emotive. Surprise. Beginner type spell. Curse. Chains of Alacantria. Intermediate type spell. Curse. Grip of Pestilence. Skills. Innate Foresight. Innate Ether Weave. Innate Veil of Deception. Innate Step of Suppression. Julian D. Iviness. Oh, this. I took a step back. What kind of situation is this? Thump. A figure fell before the archbishop. Uck. Convulsing beneath the archbishop's feet. Black tears continued to fall from the figure's eyes. The man appeared to want to say something, but the only thing that came out of his mouth were incoherent words. Oh my. Archbishop looked at the man with genuine sadness. It looks like this disciple still needs to be taught. He lifted his head, his gaze darting to the nuns encircling the room. Their eyes were eerily closed, faces expressionless, and they clutched candles that flickered slightly. An unsettling stillness gripped the air as the archbishop waved his hand. Bring him to the trials of the forgotten minds. His mind is still corrupted. At his order, the eyes of the nuns flicked open as two stepped forward. As if understanding what was happening, the man on the floor started to convulse further. His screams echoed loudly within the church. Nonetheless, they were all for naught. Even as he resisted, he could only watch as the nuns lifted his body and carried him away. Walk, drip, drip. Black tears stained the ground as he left. Staring into the distance, Archbishop Lucas closed his eyes. Then, turning back to face the altar, he mumbled, "It looks like it's time for the disciples in training to have a taste of the room of the forgotten minds. Only then would they truly become disciples." Fuck. Leaning against the side of the wall, Kira looked up at the ceiling walls. It had been several hours since she had been locked up in the room, and she was quite frankly bored. The adrenaline and confusion had all passed, and all that she had left was boredom. It's so dirty as well. Looking around, she felt her hands tingle. It was so dirty and unorganized, and that was despite there not being any decorations in the place. Fuck, fuck, fuck. I want to clean this. She started to scratch the back of her head as anxiety started to take over her mind. This was torture. Rumble. Thankfully, her torture didn't last for long. All of a sudden, the doors started to rumble and she looked up. A woman dressed in white stood on the opposite end of the door. Kira didn't need her to speak to know what she wanted, and she stood up and followed her out of the room. Where are we going? The woman in white didn't answer. So that's the case. Not that it mattered to Kira. All the isolation was making her go crazy. So it's this way. I knew it. There was only one path. So was everything that happened before we came here fake? I didn't really kill, right? Kira could still recall what had happened back in the forest when she fought Aoife and Leon. She could still recall the chaos, and ever since, things had been a little awkward with the others. Well, things had always been awkward with Aoife, but they had started to get better. Now? Kira felt like things were even worse than they had ever been. It's fake, right? An illusion? Actually, she knew it wasn't the case. While she didn't fully understand what was going on, she knew that she had died twice. Of that she was certain. She just didn't want to acknowledge it. Unfortunately for Kira, she would never receive her answer. The entire time the lady in white remained quiet until she eventually came to a stop. Lost in her own thoughts, Kira's face smacked against her back. Covering her nose, she looked ahead and her expression froze. A church. A large church loomed before her eyes. Sitting on the wooden rows were familiar faces, causing Kira's expression to shift subtly. She was never able to get her words out. Gradually, her eyes locked onto a figure that stood in the middle of the church. With his eyes closed, he stood before a large altar. He seemed to be muttering something. Furthermore, right behind him was a young man with short blonde hair and blue eyes. That guy. Kira could recall him. He was the strange cadet from the Aurora Empire. What is he doing there? Kira could still recall him from the exchange they had in the forest. He was rather strong, but there was something about him that she felt was rather unsettling. She couldn't quite explain it, but he gave off similar vibes to Julian. But at the same time, he was different. Her best guess was that he was also an emotive mage, but Kira felt like there was more to it. Let us begin. Kira's thoughts were disrupted by the loud echo of the old man standing before the altar. Pressing his hand against the blonde-haired cadet, his words echoed throughout. We will now commence the trial of the Forgotten Minds. Chapter 229. Trials of the Forgotten Minds 3. Moments earlier. Welcome, everyone. I had no time to properly digest the new information before I was dragged into a large church. Looking around, I saw a few faces that I had seen back in the first chamber that they had brought us in. Thinking back, I realized that the main reason behind that situation was probably to demonstrate to us what would happen if we were to become disobedient. It looks like most of you are here. I will now start with an introduction of myself and what we do. The old man in white started to speak as I found a seat in one of the wooden rows. For some reason, as I sat down, I noticed that the expressions of everyone present as they looked at me were extremely wary. Do they hate me or something? It was like this in the first chamber as well. We are the celestial chorus. I am Archbishop Lucas, and we serve and worship the great god Heraclius. I sat confused. This was the first time I had ever heard of such a god. But at the same time, I realized something. This was no company. It was a cult. While I already had some ideas, I only received confirmation right now. I took a deep breath to calm my mind. There were still many questions that I had, but I chose to push them to the side and continued to listen. The god has granted me a vision. He was the one who let me know of your appearance. So rejoice. The pitch of his voice heightened slightly. As a devoted follower, I will do his bidding and turn all of you into his disciples. His face was bordered with fanaticism and insanity. I felt my arms shiver at the sight. Whatever god he was worshipping, I wanted to get out of this place. With such thoughts, I started to look around, trying my best to memorize everything around me in hopes of finding something that could aid my possible escape. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anything concrete. No, in fact, all it did was bring me trouble as the man's voice echoed again. You there? I felt every hair on my body rise the moment that my name was called. Raising my head, I felt a pair of two blank eyes staring back at me. My heart jolted at the sight as I suppressed a shiver. Yes. You will be the first one. As if he had made up his mind, the Archbishop nudged with his hand as several people appeared from all sides of me, grasping me by the arms and lifting me up. What's going on? I tried to resist but found myself unable to. Their grip, it was far too strong. It was almost as if their hands were made of steel. I tried to resist, but it was futile. Before long, I was brought before the priest who stared at me with its chilling white eyes. The sight made my stomach clench. Pressing both of his hands against my shoulders, he calmly spoke. Be calm. He said to be calm. But how could I be calm in this situation? Or at least I thought that way. Strangely, his words held a certain magnetism to them that numbed down my emotions and made me calm. What is this? Shocked, I looked at the man in front of me. He was smiling kindly. He almost looked like a friendly neighborhood grandpa. But I knew it was all a facade. Let us begin. He began to say, raising his hands to press it against my head. We will now commence the trial of the forgotten minds. My mind blanked. A strange glow enshrouded the church the moment the Archbishop placed his hand over Julian's head. Aoife stared at the scene with open eyes. What's going on? She didn't dare make a noise as she looked at the scene in the distance in silence. The glow only lasted for a few seconds before disappearing. Once it was gone, so was the cadet. Gasps of surprise came out from the mouths of all those present as some shuddered. On the other hand, Aoife remained firm and didn't make a single sound. She had a lot of questions in her mind, but her thoughts were taken over by the blonde-haired cadet. He appeared different than the last time she had seen him. In total, she had seen him 3 times. Each time, the vibe around him was completely different. If before he felt unsettled due to his calmness, the current him appeared to be completely different. He appeared far from calm, and despite his best attempts at trying to be calm, he simply couldn't stop himself from occasionally trembling. He looked like a completely different person. Was it all a facade? Aoife wasn't too sure. Nonetheless, she needed to think of a way out of this. Her mana was sealed, and thus, she could only sit here and watch whatever was happening. But she knew that by now, the Empire must send several search squads in order to look for them. They just needed to bide their time. Boom! Suddenly, the room shook. A pulse of mana swept the surroundings as Aoife found her clothes fluttering. When everything settled, a large projection appeared for everyone present. It was entirely in white, and standing right in the middle of it was the cadet from before. How did he get there? Aoife's narrowed as she looked towards the projection. It's been a while since I've seen this live. The Archbishop's words echoed quietly throughout the entire church. Turning his head, he looked towards everyone. Do not be afraid. This is good for you. Once his turn is over, it will be your turn, so make sure you take notes of what happens. His smile grew subtly. Be happy. The world was white. In one moment I had been standing in front of the church, and in the next moment, I was standing in this world of white. Looking down, I could see my own reflection. I could still not get used to the sight that greeted me. I looked completely different than how I normally looked. It was hard to adjust my mind to the sight. Thankfully, there was something else that took my mind away from it. Walk forward. It was the voice of the Archbishop. There's no need to be scared. No one can harm you in this place. All you need to do is walk. All I have to do is walk? I looked ahead. There didn't seem to be an ending in sight. Where exactly was I supposed to walk? Am I just supposed to walk aimlessly? Walk, young disciple. If you keep walking, you will eventually reach an end. I looked ahead. It was blank. There was nothing. I wanted to get out of the place, but I knew it was impossible. The only thing I could do was walk. Walk like I was ordered to. And so, I took my first step. Tack. The floor rippled under my step, and my reflection scattered slightly. Under the first step, I felt nothing. I was worried at first, but seeing that nothing happened, I took my next step. Tack. The floor rippled under my step. I took another step. The same again. Nothing. I felt nothing. With such thoughts, I felt a lot easier and took another step forward. I didn't know what I was supposed to do and just walked. Tack, tack, tack. The ripples beneath me started to overlap with one another with each step that I took. A strange silence took over my surroundings. Staring at my reflection, I found myself squinting at the sight of it. It was starting to blur, and I couldn't quite make out the exact features of it. In fact, I also started to feel like my thoughts were starting to diminish. There was only one thought in my mind currently. Walk. I need to walk. Tack, tack. The sound of the steps started to grow fainter. My legs started to move on their own, and my thoughts continued to diminish. No longer did I think about my situation or what was going on with the entire situation. I just walked. Step by step, I walked through the white world. Tack. Gradually, I started to lose all sense of myself, be it time or emotions. I was starting to feel nothing. Looking down, my face was entirely blurry. But within the blur, I could see my blue eyes. They were muddled and unclear. This me? I felt my steps slowing down. Staring at my reflection, I massaged my cheeks while staring into those muddled eyes of mine. Who? I blinked. Who am I? It was a simple question and it was at the tip of my tongue, and yet I found it impossible for me to answer. Who? Who was I? I couldn't remember a thing. I think my name starts with E? Evan? Yes, it was something like that. Evan. That's my name. I nodded in satisfaction after repeating the name. Sounded right. It was right. I was Evan. Suddenly, the world around me changed. The white disappeared, and I was startled to see myself standing in the middle of a large church. A hand was pressed against my head, and when I looked ahead, I saw an old man with a kind smile. You have done well. I blinked my eyes. Done well? What was he talking about? And who was he? Shoo. He stopped me from speaking. Your mind is currently very sensitive. This was just a taste of the trails. To get your mind adjusted for the real thing. He smiled again. This time, he was looking towards the rows behind him. There I could see several dozen eyes locked onto me. Who? They felt vaguely familiar and yet didn't. Before I even had the chance to understand what was going on, the man beckoned several people dressed in white towards him. Bring him back to his chamber. We will start the real thing soon. That was the last thing I remembered before my world turned black. Chapter 230. The Ring of Nothingness 1. 230 The Ring of Nothingness 1. This is... Aoife's eyes were locked on the projection that was displayed for everyone to see. She could hardly describe the shock that she was feeling as she saw the cadet from the Aurora Empire walk within the world of white. As he walked, she could vividly see his eyes starting to lose focus with each step that he took. She wasn't the only one who noticed this. Everyone else noticed the same change as the air around them started to grow tense. It's almost as if he's losing sight of himself. More specifically, she looked towards the nuns and priests that were around them. Seeing the lost and hollow looks in their eyes, she started to realize what was going on and covered her mouth. This trial, rather than a trial, it's more like something that is used to erase the identity of those that go inside. Aoife blinked her eyes as she felt the beat of her heart speed up. It wasn't so much that she was worried about what was going on, but rather it was more because she felt like this situation was vaguely familiar to her. Where have I heard of this before? Aoife started to rack her brain over the situation. From the white world that rippled with each step, to the weird cases where everyone started to lose their sense of self. Then it finally hit Aoife as her eyes widened. Holding her breath, she felt her back straighten. It's no wonder it felt so familiar to me. Aoife bit her lips with enough force to cause them to bleed. But that was of no concern to her as her eyes darted towards the man who referred to himself as the Archbishop. Aoife could tell at a glance that he wasn't strong. He was weaker than her. And yet, with everyone's mana sealed, they were helpless. Not to mention that his servants were all quite strong. But that wasn't her focus. No, her attention was riveted on the silver ring on his hand, resting atop the cadet's head. That was when it all clicked to Aoife, who breathed coldly. The Ring of Nothingness. Within her family was a large library that all the members were granted access to. There had been a time when Aoife used to spend a lot of time in the library. In particular, she paid particular attention to a certain book which was known as the 7 Artifacts of Evil. That book detailed the most infamous artifacts in the world, all of whom had been used for the purpose of evil and had caused a large imbalance within the world's order. Amongst them, the Ring of Nothingness was one such artifact. as an artifact that used to belong to the Empire of Nothingness, an empire that existed during the Age of Umbral Dominion. In that period, the Emperor used the Ring of Nothingness to completely enslave and control all those beneath him. His greed for power drove him to conquer the other existing empires, causing a great world war that lasted just a bit before the era of sovereign ascendance, which was when the four empires came to power. The battle had been a brutal one, and in the end, the Empire of Nothingness was defeated. The losses that came from such a large conflict were astronomical, and the Ring of Nothingness was eventually lost in the conflict. But that's without a doubt the Ring of Nothingness. Aoife could recognize it from just a glance. And everything around her was also an affirmation of its authenticity. Not good. Aoife felt the beat of her heart beat loudly within her mind. It was so loud that she could hardly pay any attention to what was happening ahead. What do I do? Once someone was under the Ring of Nothingness, it was almost impossible for them to free themselves from its control. All power was meaningless within that world. The only thing one could do was walk. Walk until they lost sight of who they were. Aoife did recall reading from the book that there had been someone in the past who had been able to free themselves from the grasp of the Ring of Nothingness, but there wasn't much information about how they had done it. The only thing the book detailed was a simple quote from the person: "To escape the Ring of Nothingness, you must know who you are." What did that mean? Aoife tried to rack her brain over the words but found herself unable to. "You have done well." Aoife's thoughts were broken by the Archbishop's voice. Turning her head, her gaze fell on the cadet who stood before him. He seemed lost, and his eyes appeared muddled. His body swayed left and right as he struggled to keep himself straight. Aoife stared at the scene with an approaching dread as she felt her hands starting to tingle with anxiety. This is not good. Drip. Something wet streaked down her chin as she kept her gaze fixed on the ring on the Archbishop's hand. This is really not good. A rocky ceiling greeted my vision. Massaging my face, I remained on the floor while staring at the rocky ceiling. It felt familiar, but at the same time didn't. But that wasn't the most important thing. Closing my eyes, I tried to recall the scenes from before. I don't remember well. My mind was blank. I tried to think but found myself unable to. It was as if my brain was refusing to cooperate with me. Startling my brain were a pair of red eyes, and I hastily sat up to see an owl and a cat looking at me from the distance. They didn't say anything, but I understood something from the moment that I looked at them. They're not my enemies. Was it instincts or something else? It looks like you haven't completely lost it. The owl began to speak. It was a peculiar situation. For some strange reason, we couldn't go out at all in that white world. It's as if something was blocking us. White world. I closed my eyes and thought back. White world, white world, white world. I could vaguely recall something, and I opened my mouth to speak when I was cut off by the owl. Let's fix your memory first. Fix? I looked at the owl in confusion. To my shock, it was already standing next to my shoulder, and I felt something smack against the back of my head. Smack. It hurt quite a bit. The worst part was that nothing happened. Turning my head to glare at the owl, I suddenly paused after a second. My entire body grew stiff and my expression froze. What did you do to me? I tried to speak, but couldn't. Stay still. The owl's voice continued to sound in my ears, and shortly after, something hit me again at the back of my head. Smack. It was harder than it was before, but unlike the first time, something did happen. My vision blurred for a split second and images soon started to appear within my vision. My brain jolted with all sorts of images and memories, and I held onto my head as I fell to the ground. Thump. It was hard to describe the pain that I was currently feeling. I thought I was someone who could take pain, but what I currently felt was not something I could ignore. Thrashing on the ground, I felt spit flow out of my mouth. My screams echoed throughout as I held tightly onto my head. By the time all of it was over, my breath was heavy. The pain still lingered in my mind, making me shiver at the thought. However, I remember. I could finally remember. At least, up until I woke up in this strange environment and took over this body. Almighty Pebble. No, I was cut off by Pebble, who glared at me. That's not my name. Stupid cat. Stupid owl, do you want to go at it again? I ignored the two and consolidated the memories in my mind. In the end, once I did, I looked towards Almighty. How? Are you asking for how I was able to restore your memories? Yes. I nodded slightly. It wasn't that difficult. Almighty went on to explain. Your memories were never removed to begin with. They weren't. I blinked my eyes, unsure of what it was trying to say. I was quite sure they had been removed. Your memories weren't removed. Your mind, on the other hand, was affected. Raising its wing, a small blue orb the size of a golf ball appeared on top of its wing. This is what was in your mind. It's a ball purely made out of mana, and its job is to prevent your neurons from sending signals to your brain, essentially numbing your brain and stopping it from thinking properly. Your memory loss was a result of this process, at least for what currently happened. Regarding your other situation, I am not sure how it happened. A clear picture of the situation started to form in my mind. If that's the case, I stopped myself and thought back to the last words that the Archbishop said. We will start the real thing soon. I found myself covering my mouth. If this was merely just a trial, then, haha, my breath started to grow heavy. You were lucky. Looking up, Almighty brought the orb to its mouth and swallowed it. Your mana is sealed, but the same can't be said for the two of us. Although all, as individual wills, we have our own mana pool that we can use. While we mainly rely on your mana, we can store a tiny bit within your bones. It's for that reason that you're lucky. Listening to Almighty's words, I squinted my eyes and pretended to understand. In reality, I didn't understand at all what it was trying to say. Thankfully, its next set of actions made a lot more sense to me. I didn't do it before since I was still observing you, but it looks like I have no choice but to do this. Raising its wing, a strange glow manifested over Almighty's body. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shook and I felt something crawl up on my foot. I was shocked to see a black root appearing from the ground and I almost removed it from my foot, when Almighty's voice stopped me. Don't do anything. The root encircled my foot. It wrapped around it tightly, and a strange current flowed into my body. I didn't understand what was going on, but it felt strangely good. It continued for the next few minutes before finally stopping. I stood in silence for a brief second, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did, or at least in the first few minutes. After a few more minutes passed, I hastily gripped my chest as I felt something grip my heart. I was once again invaded by pain as I gripped my chest and hunched down. Weird gagging noises came out of my mouth as I hunched over and grasped the hard rocky floor. Yuka. My mind temporarily blanked from the pain. PFTTT. Only for clarity to return shortly after as blood spewed out of my mouth. In that brief moment, I felt a warm current enter my body as clarity resurfaced within my mind. Che. Still hunched over, I took several deep breaths to calm myself down before spotting something in front of me. It was a purple centipede, and it squirmed under my grasp. Covered in my own blood, I had a sudden realization and looked towards Almighty. That was the thing blocking your mana. Now that it's removed, you can freely use mana. Mana? I was still foreign to the concept. What was it and how did I use it? You need to think fast. We don't have much time. For what? For your escape. I shifted my focus away from the centipede. I won't be able to help you if you get caught again. If you want freedom, then do as I say. Almighty turned to look at the cat. For the next few hours, we will be teaching you how to use your abilities. Chapter 231. The Ring of Nothingness. 2. 231. The Ring of Nothingness. 2. Leon sat in his chamber with his eyes closed. He was shirtless, and a blue glow manifested from within his body, highlighting every vein in his body. Ba, thump, ba, thump. The beat of his heart quietly echoed throughout the room as his heart was also highlighted by the blue glow coming from within his body. It was a sight that would leave anyone breathless. Just like everyone else, he underwent the trial of the Forgotten Minds. However, unlike them, he was able to retain his rationality. With the chalice in his body, all the mana that entered his brain was quickly absorbed by it. PFTT. The silence that took over the room shattered as Leon spat a mouthful of blood. Drip, drip. Covering his mouth, Leon lowered his head to stare at the centipede that squirmed before him. As expected, bringing the centipede closer to his face to get a better look at it, he stared at it for a few seconds before pinching his fingers together and squishing it. A black liquid oozed out from the centipede's body the moment he squeezed his fingers and killed them. Using his clothes, Leon cleaned his finger from the residue and took a deep breath. The blue glow that formed around his body started to diminish gradually, until finally coming to a stop. A powerful force then surged from the depths of Leon's body as his muscles tensed, and his expression turned red. Clenching his teeth, he forced himself to not make any sounds. Cracka, cracka. Cracking sounds echoed throughout the confines of the room as Leon's expression twisted. Bone reformation, a process that all those who went from Tier 3 to Tier 4 underwent. It was a painful process that disintegrated the bones of the user and created newer and sturdier ones. Unless someone underwent this process, they wouldn't be able to truly be called Tier 4 users. To reach Tier 5, one had to create a domain. The pain was starting to get to Leon's mind, and for a brief moment, his mind turned completely blank. But he was quick to bring his consciousness back. He ended up screaming a little, but he managed to keep the noise down. It wasn't that he was afraid that someone would hear, as he was confident the soundproofing was quite good. He was just being cautious. There were a lot of what-ifs in the world. Thankfully, the process didn't last for too long. Leon was done in just about 5 minutes as steam rose up from his body, which was entirely red. His clothes were sticky from the sweat, and his head was hot. Still, Tier 4. Leon stared at his arms, which were thicker than before. He could feel that he was currently bursting with power. With just a punch, he was confident in destroying the door that was keeping him in. There were runes outside that prevented someone from forcefully breaking the doors, but those no longer were of concern to him. Leon stood up from his spot, flapping his clothes which were soaked in his own sweat. He walked up to the door and pressed his palm against it. I need to get out of here. There wasn't much time. He was without a doubt stronger than the archpriest, but he wasn't Leon's main concern. There were more than a dozen followers who were all strong in their own right. While Leon was indeed strong now, he didn't think he could defeat them all by himself. The only logical path for him was to run. But, I need to save everyone. At least those he could. He couldn't escape by himself. He needed help. For that reason, he started to think about ways to free the others. Soon an idea came to mind and he channeled the mana inside of his body, sending a subtle pulse towards the door. I hope this works. Rumble. Soon, the doors started to open. Leon stood still on the spot until the outline of a figure in white appeared in his vision. With their hollow eyes, they were staring at him. In the distance, he could also hear the sound of approaching footsteps. So they can communicate with each other rather fast. Leon closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. Then, with a sharp glint, he pressed his foot against the ground and rushed through the small opening of the door as it opened. His movements were quick, and within the time it took for someone to take a breath, he had already slid out of the chamber. The moment he managed to get out of the chamber, the first thing Leon did was turn around and dive toward the guard stationed outside of his place. Everything happened in a few seconds, and the guard was barely able to turn around before Leon slipped right behind them and grasped their neck. Cracka. Leon didn't waste a second and snapped their neck. Thump. Watching as their body fell down, Leon took a small breath. He then kicked the body into the chamber and pressed his hand against it. Rumble. The doors started to close. In the meantime, Leon placed his hand over his face. His muscles started to squirm, and so did his facial structure. Soon, he adopted an appearance that was eerily similar to the guard stationed outside of the room. He looked like an uncanny copy, but Leon knew that it was far from enough. Tack, tack, tack. The distant footsteps drew nearer, and he clenched his fists tightly. Tensing his back, he looked towards the distance where he saw the depths of the tunnel, which was covered in black. He stood still for several seconds as the footsteps drew near. They continued, coming closer to him. Closer. Kloss. Hup. Leon pressed his foot against the ground the moment he caught a glimpse of a certain something in the distance. His body blurred shortly after, arriving right before the group of guards that had come to check up on his area. Bring his fist back. Leon punched forward. Bang. A loud explosion sounded. This is from me? I looked around me in shock. Threads. I could see threads covering the entire space around me. They were thin and almost imperceptible to the eye. They look really sharp too. I brought my hand forward and touched one of them. The moment my finger came into contact with one of the threads, I felt a stinging pain on my finger, and when I turned my finger around, I spotted a line of red tracing down my finger. So sharp. This is far from enough. I raised my head upon hearing Almighty's voice. Far from enough? I looked at my arm. There, 3 threads coiled around it as they scattered throughout the room. Just 3 were quite hard to control for me, but I thought that I had done quite a good job. This was still far from enough? Julian was capable of handling 10 such threads. I frowned slightly. There was a strange sense of discomfort within me the moment that I heard about Julian. During my practice, I had asked them about him in hopes of finding out if he was really me, but the more I listened to their description of him, the more I realized that there was simply no way. Especially when Almighty cast an illusion on him. He seemed like a robot to me. From the way they described him, he was this perfect machine that could absorb pain endlessly. At the same time, he also appeared to be a loner. I was also a loner, but he seemed to be actively pushing people away. Listening to their recounts of him, there was only one thought in my mind. I don't like him. Despite having never met him, I didn't like him. He was strange. Something about the way that he behaved repulsed me. And to make matters worse, he was a mass murderer. Wholeheartedly rejected such a person. That person could never be me. Focus. We don't have much time left. We're going to go through your abilities. Yes. Listening to Almighty, all thoughts with regard to Julian vanished, and I focused on what was in front of me. I could only control 3 threads, and it didn't seem like controlling a 4th was impossible. For that reason, I moved on to the next skill, which was Veil of Deceit. For me, that was a lot easier to learn. All I needed to do was imagine something and use my mana to cover it. Indeed, staring at the rock in front of me, I imagined a wooden chair, and within a few short seconds, a chair started to manifest before my very eyes. It wasn't very clear, but with the passing of the seconds, it became more and more pronounced. After a certain point, it almost looked real. Not good enough. Unfortunately, Almighty didn't seem satisfied with my progress. You need to be faster. Illusions that take so long are useless. You still have a few hours. Keep practicing. Lowering my head, I sighed in exasperation. However, as I thought about my circumstances and was reminded of my brother, I chose to persevere. All of this so that I can get out. This much pain was nothing compared to the times when I was in pain due to my cancer or work. This much exhaustion was nothing. And so, for the next few hours, I continued to diligently practice. Again, no, that's bad. Julian could do this in a few seconds. Almighty was relentless with his teaching. Perhaps it was because it was an animal or whatever thing it was, it held no regard to my emotions and feelings and continued to force me to work. It was ruthless, but I still persisted. Halfway through the situation, Pebble joined in and started to teach me his skill. Step of suppression. Unlike the other skills, this one was a lot easier to understand and practice. It didn't need as much control as the other skills that Almighty taught me. Of course, there were still things that I needed to be able to control when using the skill. In particular, I needed to remain focused so that I could distinguish who to affect under the skill and who to not. Apparently that was possible. That's enough. Hearing Almighty's voice, I stopped and looked towards it. My breath was extremely heavy and sweat was pouring down from the side of my face. You can rest now. Thump. The moment Almighty said those words, as if all tension in my body left, I dropped down to the ground and started to breathe heavily. Hup. Hup. I was tired. So tired that I could hardly find any words to speak. Have some rest. After that, we need to plan a way to go out. You need to be fully healthy to do that. I nodded in silence. I wanted to speak, but my mouth just refused to open. In the end, the only thing that I could do was blankly stare at the ceiling while I recuperated. That was my plan. At least until, bang. A large explosion resounded in the distance. Bang. I hastily sat up the moment the explosion sounded. What happened? I looked in the direction of where the noise came from. Reinforcements? Were we going to get rescued from this place? My heartbeat accelerated at the thought, but Almighty was quick to pour cold water over my thoughts. It's unlikely. I turned my head to look at it. Why? If it were reinforcements, then they wouldn't be so obvious. In fact, considering how important you all are to the Empire, I'm sure they would send that lady. That lady? I looked at the owl in confusion, but seeing that it refused to elaborate, I could only remain silent. Who is he talking about? And why do I notice something strange when he mentioned her? It almost looked scared, but at the same time didn't. It was hard to tell. Judging from the power of the attack, it's most likely been done by one of your classmates. One of my classmates? I was surprised by Almighty's words. While I didn't know any of them, judging from the power of the explosion, they seemed to be quite strong. Nonetheless, I knew that something outside of its expectations had occurred. I looked at Almighty and asked, what do I do? We hasten our plans. Flapping its wings, Almighty moved and positioned itself over my shoulder. Pebble, on the other hand, moved ahead of me and faced the door. I looked towards it for a few seconds before turning my attention towards the door. What now? Press your hand against the door. Though confused, I still complied and pressed my hand against the door. Focus all of your attention on the door and use the skill that I taught you. Imagine that cracks are all over the door. I finally understood what its intentions were and closed my eyes. Cracks, cracks, cracks. I then started to imagine cracks like Almighty suggested. Be it on the front and on the back, I imagined for cracks to appear. It took me several seconds to complete the imagery, and once I was done, I put my hand away and took a step back. Not bad. Almighty was the first to compliment me as it looked at the door, which was filled with all sorts of cracks. It looked like it would shatter with a simple touch. Get ready. The door will be opening soon. I nodded and looked towards my arm. For a few seconds, my eyes lingered over the tattoo that was on my arm. It was a strange four-leaved clover that wasn't all that pleasing to the eyes. I wasn't a fan of tattoos to begin with, so I felt a little repulsed by the sight. What a waste. Good thing this isn't my body. Get ready. Rumble. I hastily looked up towards the doors that rumbled open. My heart skipped a beat the moment it did, and I suddenly grew nervous. Threads began to flow out of my arm, moving forward and slipping through the narrow gap in the door. I could feel my breathing grow with each passing second as I focused my entire attention on controlling the threads. Sweat dripped down from the side of my face as I fully focused on my task. Slowly, the threads started to make their way forward and encircle the legs of the person standing on the opposite end. Now, at Almighty's words, I clenched my hand and hooked the threads around the legs. Snap, snap. I thought that I had succeeded, but I was disappointed and horrified to see the threads snap the moment they hooked onto the ankles. The doors opened up further, and the figure on the opposite end bent over to get in. Their hollow, lifeless eyes fixed on me, and from beneath, their skeletal hands reached out, grasping hungrily in my direction. My heart sped up and I tried using the threads again, but that was of no use either as the hand swept over the threads, snapping them quickly. Pathetic. Stepping forward, Pebble pressed its tiny foot against the ground. Thump. The guard immediately lost their balance and fell face-first against the ground. Then, stepping forward, Pebble pressed its tiny paw over its head, and, Poochie, squished its head entirely. Ah! Pieces of flesh scattered throughout as I felt something well up from deep within my body, slowly making its way up into my mouth. I pressed my hand against my mouth and tried my absolute best to not puke. But it was hard. Really hard. Get over it, Pebble said, looking back at me with cold eyes. This shouldn't have happened had you been more decisive. Who told you to aim for its legs? You clearly don't want to kill. I had no excuses. The cat was right. The reason why I had failed was because I didn't aim for the kill and just planned to get rid of its legs. But how can you ask me to kill when I've never killed before? It wasn't as though I was pro-life or anything like that. I could kill if it was necessary, but I understood my limits. If I was to kill right now, then my mind would fall into a state of chaos. It would be all that I was going to think about for the next few hours, making it hard for me to focus. But it wasn't just that. Staring at the pieces of flesh on the ground, and the blood that was pooling beneath my feet, I felt my stomach churn. That was also another thing that I needed to get used to. Holding onto my mouth, I forced myself to look at the scene right before my very eyes. I made sure to imprint it in my mind. I need to get used to this. I need to get used to this. In order for me to survive. I needed to get used to this. Letting out a long breath, I slowly looked forward to where Almighty stood. It stared at me in silence, and I felt a shudder run down my back under its piercing gaze. It was there that I understood something. If I don't change, it'll kill me. I clenched my teeth. Lowering my head to stare at the body once more, I clenched my teeth harder before moving forward. You don't have to tell me that. Whack. Crack. A neck snapped as Leon clenched his hand. Thump. Tossing the body to the side, he looked towards the door to his left and pressed his hand against the wall. There was no complicated password to unlock the door. All he needed to do was channel his mana on the door from the outside. Rumble. The doors started to open shortly after he channeled his mana. I still don't understand how you did it. Several people were standing behind Leon. They were none other than Aoife, Kira, and a few others from Haven. The first thing Leon did after coming out was help them out. He didn't know who was in which door, so he just opened whatever door he passed. What's going on? Who are you? A girl with purple hair appeared right after the door opened. She looked at them in a daze. Leon felt himself sigh in relief upon seeing her and moved closer to her. Wait, stop. She tried to protest, but it was of no use. With her mana sealed, she wasn't able to put up much of a struggle. In the end, Leon overpowered her and pressed his hand against her back. PFTT. Spitting out blood, a familiar centipede appeared for everyone to see. Aoife stared at it with a frown. Mana-suppressing centipede. It was a rather rare breed of centipede that was used to suppress someone's mana. Given that there were other methods to suppress someone's mana, they weren't that popular, but that wasn't what bothered her. How did he get his hands on them? Mana-suppressing centipedes were quite rare and very hard to find. Unless someone had a lot of resources, it was almost impossible to find them. How did a cult of this size manage to get them? Aoife didn't understand. Leon? Turning around, Aoife's eyes paused on Evelyn. Her gaze was no longer muddled, and her eyes were clear. Looks like he succeeded. Staring at Leon, Aoife pursed her lips slightly. He had been the one to save her and everyone else. She was extremely surprised to see that he had reached Tier 4 and that he had been able to resist the effect of the Ring of Nothingness. Unlike him, she found herself unable to retain her rationality. He's certainly hiding something, from the sudden surge in strength to his ability to resist the ring's power. Aoife knew that Leon was hiding something, but chose to keep her curiosity in check. There was no need to pry over the secrets of everyone present. Furthermore, he had saved her. She wasn't ungrateful to the point where she'd demand answers from him. She was just glad to be free. What next? Kira's voice reached Aoife from behind. Turning around, Aoife looked at Kira, who briefly paused her gaze on her. Things were certainly awkward between the two, but given the circumstances, they managed to push the feelings aside. We need to free the others. Leon answered from the back as he stood up and helped Evelyn up as well. Walking forward, he looked around with a serious expression. By now, the Archbishop should be aware of the fact that we've escaped. We don't have much time. I'm sure that all of you have noticed this, but he's not very strong. The ones who are strong are those who are under his influence. If we go now, we don't stand a chance of escaping. We need more people. Listening to his words, Aoife nodded her head. His reasoning made sense. She agreed with him. Are we also rescuing the bastards from the other empire? Kira asked all of a sudden, and everyone turned quiet. The silence was quickly broken by both Leon and Aoife. Yes, of course. Yes. Everyone turned to look towards them, and Aoife answered for Leon. Not only are they strong, but this is also a chance to get them to owe us something. If we can, we should free them. I guess. Kira mumbled while scratching the back of her head. Leon looked around the group before looking at Aoife. Let's split. Okay. Aoife nodded without hesitation. If things were to continue at their current pace, they would never be able to get enough people to fight against the cultists. They needed to split up and free enough people. We're currently in 10. You bring 5 and I take 5. When you gather 5 more, you can split again. Let's meet at the church. That's where the exit is located. Yes. Aoife nodded before turning around to look at her group. Her heart dropped the moment she noticed Kira, but she quickly pushed her feelings aside and nudged with her head. Let's go. Candles flickered, and light seeped in through the mosaic windows. Archbishop Lucas stood in silence, staring at the altar before him. The silence was eerie, almost oppressive. That silence was broken shortly after. Your Holiness. One of the nuns appeared behind him. Turning around, the Archbishop's white eyes locked with the nun. There was no need for the two to exchange any words. With just a glance, he knew exactly what she wanted to relay to him. So they've escaped. Instead of being angry, he smiled. His eyes turned a murkier white color, as things should be. The candles flickered with more intensity and the ring on the Archbishop's hand glowed with even more intensity. It continued like this for the next few seconds before the Archbishop waved his hand forward. Go. Around the church, the nuns and priests present all stepped forward in unison before turning to face the entrance to the cave. As if they were robots, they all moved in the same manner as their robes and clothes fluttered slightly. Don't hesitate to kill them. The Archbishop's firm and cold voice echoed throughout the entire church as his smile grew more gentle. We can revive them later. Aoife and Kira moved quietly alongside the cave system. Neither one talked and just moved forward. Things were rather awkward between the two of them ever since the incident up above, but they were able to tell that this wasn't the right moment to act on their resentments. Therefore, the two, alongside the others who were present, cooperated with one another and started to free everyone that they could. Clank, clank. Explosions rang everywhere as they fought against the priests and nuns. They were quite strong, and Aoife had a hard time dealing with them just by herself. Bringing her hands forward, she halted several people as a tremendous flame burst from behind her, engulfing everything in front of her. Swoosh. The intense heat rushed toward Aoife, forcing her to shield her face. Once the heat cooled off, only charred remains were left in front of her. Aoife didn't need to look to know who was responsible for all of this and instead looked towards the others who were busy freeing the imprisoned cadets. Done on this side. Same here. I've just opened the door. Josephine shouted as she helped someone up. They're from the Aurora Empire. We're in the process of removing the centipede. Okay. Aoife overlooked the operation with a stoic expression. She was tired, but everything was proceeding smoothly so far. If things were to keep up this way, then she believed that they'd be able to get out soon enough. There's still the Archbishop, but dealing with him shouldn't be a problem. Aoife was confident in being able to deal with him. Furthermore, although she hated to admit it, Kira had gotten considerably stronger over the past few months. With her present, Aoife wasn't that worried. The only problem was the number of minions at the Archbishop's disposal, but with their numbers, Aoife felt a little confident in handling them. Good. The situation was looking up for them. All was great. All was... Aoife suddenly blinked her eyes. In one moment, she felt like she was looking forward, and in the next moment, she was looking back. The surrounding noise had ceased to enter her mind and her eyes locked towards Kira, who was looking at her with widened eyes. She appeared to be saying something, but Aoife struggled to hear her. What's she saying? What is she? Aoife's thoughts stopped as she felt something trickle down the side of her face. When she looked down, she realized it was a black tear. But that wasn't what took her aback. What took her aback was something else. It was, why are my legs facing the other way? Aoife blinked her eyes. It was just a blink. However, The next moment she opened her eyes, she found Kira standing right before her with her hand pressed against her face. Through the narrow gap of Kira's fingers, Aoife was able to read her lips as Kira nudged the vial on her arm. "You'll be fine," she said. "I think." In the next moment, Aoife felt heat engulf her entire body. Her mind went blank from the searing pain, but amidst the agony, one thought pierced through her consciousness. "This bitch. They'll kill her when I have the chance." Right, it was revenge. Because she knew she was doing this on purpose. This bitch. Aoife started to lose consciousness. And yet, as she gradually lost it, for some reason, she felt the situation to be funny. Even amidst the pain, she found Kira's last words to be funny. It was just so like her. The corridors were quiet. Tack, tack. The only sound I could hear was the rhythmic echo of my own footsteps. They rang quietly within my mind as I walked ahead. There was only one path, and thus I needed to be extremely careful. I was worried about any of the guards that I would meet along the way and tried my best to keep my steps quiet. Fortunately, as I continued forward, I didn't meet anyone. It was strange. Why is no one here? For them to hold me captive and yet have no guards stationed, it was a pleasant surprise, but at the same time, I felt my heart start to grow heavy. I knew things couldn't be this easy. Still, I knew that I couldn't start overthinking things. Looking ahead, I could only hold my breath and continue forward. Whatever the case was, I had no other choice but to keep moving forward. I did hear the loud explosion earlier. Perhaps it has something to do with that. No, it was most likely that. Thinking about the explosion, I decided to hurry my steps. Since Almighty said that it probably comes from the people from before, then it's likely that they're also trying to escape. I started to piece all of the information together. The guards are probably all focused on trying to capture them. The good thing was that they were quite far from where I was. This meant that I had a lot of freedom to work. But still, there was still one major problem. Where do I go? I looked at the road which forked into 3 different directions. I silently groaned at the sight before me. Pursing my lips, I tried to recall the way. However, seeing how they were all identical, I started to struggle. Despite the fact that Almighty had gotten rid of the thing that was in my head, my mind was still a little clouded. Added to the exhaustion from my training, I really didn't know where to go. Bang. Dada. Another explosion echoed in the distance. My heart started to speed up as anxiety started to kick in, and in the end, I decided to go with the middle road. Worst case, I'll go back. If I could. Running through the cave, my heart was beating like crazy and my breath grew heavier with each step that I took. Sweat began to form on my forehead, and my hair started to stick to my face. Brushing it to the side, I picked up my pace. Stop. Only for me to stop a few steps in as Almighty appeared right before me. Its expression was serious as it looked into the distance. I sensed something strange. Almighty spoke in a solemn tone. I was taken aback by its tone. What's going on? Is there something up ahead? Should we turn back? Quiet. Almighty looked into the distance and narrowed its eyes. Then, to my surprise, it walked forward. Follow me, but don't make any sounds and just follow. I swallowed whatever word that I wanted to say and followed obediently. Right, it's on my side for now. You shouldn't try to hurt me. Tack tack. Just like before, it was quiet. And yet, unlike before, each step that I took raised the hair on my body. A certain coolness washed over my body, making my heart beat faster. There were many things that I wanted to ask Almighty, but chose to keep my mouth quiet. I was afraid of attracting any unwanted attention. Stop. Almighty stopped, and so did I. Looking up, I saw a large door up ahead. There were no guards stationed before the door, and it looked just like the door that was used to keep me in my chamber. The only difference was its size. It was much larger. What is this? I don't know. I looked at Almighty. There's a strange energy coming from this room. Strange energy? I looked at the door. I didn't feel anything. Place your hand on the door and channel your mana. My eyes widened slightly as I looked at Almighty. However, the owl didn't bother looking back as it kept its gaze on the door. Every part of me screamed not to do it, but thinking back to Almighty and the way it had looked at me before, I clenched my teeth and stepped forward. Then, pressing my hand against the door, I started to channel my mana. A purple glow manifested over the door. Rumble. Rumble. The surroundings started to shake as the doors started to lift and I took a step back. I waited with bated breath as the doors opened. I wanted to see exactly what was behind those doors and what compelled Almighty to make me open them. Cracka. Or at least, that was until I heard a sudden cracking sound coming from behind me and I felt my blood freeze in my veins. My head flicked back as I started to channel my mana. But I was shocked to see that there was nothing behind me. I blinked my eyes a couple of times. Was it just my imagination? Looking around, I didn't see anything. Only darkness stood in the distance, and I secretly swallowed. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. Drip, drip. As I turned to focus my attention back on the door, I felt a trickle of liquid slide down the side of my face. Surprised, I touched my face, only to freeze on the spot. A black liquid stained my fingers and I took a deep breath. Then, slowly, I raised my head to look up. I felt my breath be completely taken away from me the moment I looked up. Cracka, cracka. The cracking sounds returned, and I felt myself lose control of my body. There, right above me, hung one of the guards. Their arms were grotesquely attached to the ceiling, their body twisted unnaturally. Their head was bent backward, and their deep black eyes bore into mine. Drip, drip. Black tears continued to stain the ground as it looked at me, and I took a step back. I swallowed nervously. I knew it couldn't be that easy. I felt my entire body paralyze on the spot. Staring ahead, my throat clamped up as I silently swallowed. A cold sweat drenched my back as I did so. Crack. The air was filled with the sickening sound of cracking bones as the neck twisted grotesquely in my direction. Drip. Black droplets stained the ground as I stood with my breath held. What are you doing? It was the sound of Almighty's voice that shattered my thoughts. Fight it. I almost looked back in shock. Fight it? Can I even fight it? I could tell at a glance that whatever thing was before me was strong. I had hardly gotten any practice with my skills and had no experience fighting. How could I fight it? Sadly, I never had the chance to retort as the creature lunged at me. Swoosh. It didn't make any sound as it did, but it was extremely fast. I was able to avoid it just barely. Crack. Cracking sounds echoed once again as the creature stood on all fours, its belly grotesquely facing upwards, and its head twisted unnaturally in the opposite direction. Its pitch-black eyes glared at me as I felt my hand shiver. Swoosh. It moved again. Nimble and agile, it slithered around the cave, its body contorting in ways that defied human anatomy with its neck and back continuously twisting to aid its movements. My mind processed the situation rather quickly, and despite my panic, I pressed my foot forward. Now, thump. The creature fell slightly down as the gravity around it increased, and threads started to emerge from out of my hand and head towards it. At the same time, I reached out with my other hand and a purple magic circle manifested. I felt lightheaded as I did so, and the magic circle took a little while to form, but it still completed after a short while as a purple hand manifested before the creature, gripping it directly in the neck. The mana inside of my body drained as the hand touched the creature, but I could vividly see the creature growing weaker as it started to fall further under the gravity impression. I might be able to do it. I felt my heart race at the thought as I rushed the threads forward. My aim was its neck. Right, I need to kill it. It's not human. As the threads approached, I tried to hypnotize myself into thinking that the creature wasn't human so that I would have an easier time digesting the aftereffects of the situation. Time seemed to slow in that moment. The threads approached. They got closer to the creature. They were now only a few inches away. I felt my entire body tingle as anxiety started to kick in. It was close. So close. I was... Snap, snap. The loud snapping of threads echoed within my mind, each snap echoing loudly within my mind, as I felt a hot breath brush the back of my neck. My body jolted in panic, but there was something else that took my mind. Turning my head to look at my hand, I felt my lungs collapse as I lost my breath. Drip, drip. In the area where my hand should have been, all I could see was blood as it leaked down onto the ground, right towards my severed hand. The breath continued to run down the back of my neck as fear started to choke me. But before I could figure out what was going on, something pierced my chest and blood spurted out from my mouth. That pain was met with a sharp pain in my neck. Thump. The last thing I saw was 2 bare feet. It all happened fast, but not to the point where Almighty couldn't see what was going on. Almighty stood at the back while watching the fight alongside the stupid dragon. Yes, stupid dragon. Because it was stupid. What do you think? The stupid dragon spoke from the side. Almighty looked at it for a brief moment before answering. He will most likely die. Such was his verdict after looking at the fight that was happening. In particular, Almighty's gaze fell on the creature that was slowly creeping up from behind. It had been present the entire time, it was just that Emmett's attention was entirely focused on one of the people to notice. Are you going to help him? No. Almighty answered decisively. There was no ounce of hesitation in its voice. I don't see a reason to help him. If he dies, we will also disappear. That's fine. Almighty's gaze remained fixed on Emmett in the distance. Is it really not him? The entire time, Almighty had been wondering if it was memory loss, or if someone else had taken over the body. There were a couple of similarities between the two, But the more Almighty interacted with Emmett, the more he realized just how different they were. Julian was decisive, ruthless, and calm. On the other hand, Emmett was less decisive. He wasn't anywhere near ruthless, and he continuously panicked. They were so different in so many ways. And yet, strange. Almighty mumbled while staring at Emmett, who was staring at his missing arm. The fight was pretty much over, and it didn't take long for his head to fly off in the distance. Thump. Rolling on the floor, it stopped right before Almighty. Looking down, Almighty could see the expression of terror etched on his face. A small pool of blood began to form around his head, spreading slowly, as the creatures in the distance turned their attention toward the two of them. Crack, crack. They looked like they wanted to kill them. Meow. Stepping forward, the stupid cat's eyes glowed a strange glint. The gravity surrounding the place increased dramatically, forcing the two creatures to a halt. They are weak. That human should have been able to take these two out without a problem. By the human, the stupid dragon was referring to Julian. Indeed, the things in front of them weren't strong. They were rather weak, and the previous Julian would have been able to handle them easily. It was unfortunate that he was no longer here. PFTT, PFTT. It took no time for the stupid dragon to get rid of the two things as blood splattered all over the place. Taking its paw off their heads, it turned around to look at Julian's body. Weak. A strange glow enveloped the body, halting the flow of blood. The blood that had seeped out began to reverse course, slowly coalescing towards him and forming a pulsating, crimson ball where his head used to be. Almighty looked at the vial that was resting on his arm. It was now halfway full. 2 times. That was how many lives he had left. Those were also the number of mistakes he was going to grant this Emmett person before discarding him. Aoife woke up to the sight of 2 glaring red eyes. Her mind was blank, and she could hardly think. Or at least, until she felt a certain stinging pain over the side of her face, which was accompanied by a loud slapping sound. Slap. That sounded like it hurt. Aoife thought while her mind registered the sound. Slap. Yet again. The sound echoed and Aoife started to frown. What's going on? What sort of hatred did someone have to slap with that much force? They must really hate the pea. And then it registered. The pain. It came from both sides of her cheeks and her face contorted. Aoife held the sides of her cheeks as she felt a certain heat come from them. Touching her cheeks, she realized that they were both swollen. It hurts. The corners of her eyes started to water from the pain as she sat up and wiped the tears away. It was also then that she turned her head to glare towards the source of her pain. Standing innocently beside her was Kira, who tilted her head and wore an expression that seemed to say, "What? I didn't do anything." Aoife clenched her fist. However, her anger subsided rather fast as she realized something. "I'm alive? Yeah. It's not like it's the first time you died." Memories started to flash in her mind, and Aoife understood exactly what had happened as her gaze turned to look at the vial on her arm. As expected, it was now only 1/4 of the way filled. 1 more life left. It sounded like a lot, but Aoife didn't even understand how she had died in the first place. Stop. From the corner of her eyes, Aoife spotted something as she hastily waved her hand, stopping Kira's hand from reaching her face. Slap. Then, out of pure instinct, her hand reached Kira and she managed to land a clean slap to her face. Walk. Kira hastily covered her face. "You bitch. I was just checking to see if you were still there yet. Your face looked like it was still out of it. Well, now you know." Aoife stood up from her spot and patted her clothes clean. She then looked around her. Where are we? It seemed like they were in one of the chambers. Massaging her face, Kira glared at her. We're in one of the chambers. I don't know what happened, but you went all ape shit and stuff, so I burned you into a crisp. Oh, yeah, that happened. Aoife felt her hand twitch. Maybe I should have hit even harder. What? Don't look at me like that. You're good now, right? That's all that matters. I carried you all the way here and watched over you until you revived. What about the others? They're outside helping out the others. Kira turned her head and scratched the side of her face. I stayed back here. Aoife opened her mouth but found the words stuck in her throat. Scratching her head as well, she turned around and headed for the main door of the chamber. Rumble. Just before going out, she stopped and mumbled something. Thank you. It was low, but loud enough for Kira to hear. She looked a little stunned, but soon shook her head. It's fine. I did slap you and burn you after all. Aoife almost tripped over herself. She's right. All her feelings of gratitude disappeared and she moved out. Hey, wait. Kira followed from behind, only for her to bump into Aoife's back shortly after. Uck, what are you doing? Her words were cut short by the sight that greeted her. This body and limbs were scattered everywhere as over a dozen familiar faces stood on the opposite end staring at them with black eyes. The worst part of it all? Their necks were twisted, I died. It wasn't hard to figure out this part. Staring at the head that was lying on the ground in front of me, I held onto my stomach and tried my best to keep myself from letting the contents within my stomach spill out. You have 2 lives left. Almighty's cold voice echoed in the distance. Don't waste them. I could only swallow my breath at its words. Easier said than done. How could I not waste them when I was suddenly trusted into this hellish situation? I didn't know how to fight, I didn't know what was going on, I didn't know anything. I felt a sense of frustration build up from within me as I started to think about my circumstances. And yet, I couldn't complain. The situation was like this, and I had no choice but to adapt. Ooh, I took a deep breath and looked back. That was when my eyes finally laid on what stood behind the large door. It looked like a study room, with bookshelves lining the walls, papers scattered everywhere, and a small wooden table in the middle. The place looked different compared to the other chambers. Mighty was already inside, staring at the papers scattered throughout while the cat sat next to it, curled up on its own. I carefully entered the place and looked around. There were all sorts of objects scattered around, but my attention fell on one of the papers that Almighty was staring at. The Empire of Nothingness. Confused, I squinted my eyes to get a better look. It was there that I was able to get a short glimpse of the information written, and my expression suddenly changed. No, this doesn't make sense. A work of fiction? The contents that were written in the paper didn't make sense at all. They detailed an empire that existed within a certain era that I knew nothing about. There were so many details about the story that didn't make sense. The only way that I could explain the situation was through the "it's a work of fiction" excuse, but then again, I already had an idea of what was going on. I just didn't want to accept it. It must be this. Almighty suddenly spoke, pointing towards a certain area of the paper where a ring appeared. The Ring of Nothingness. One of the 7 artifacts of evil, and the very item wielded by the Emperor of the Empire of Nothingness to transform its citizens into mindless puppets. Ha! I drew in a cold breath at the description of the ring. That was because it felt eerily familiar to the current situation. No, but did the bishop have a ring? I hadn't paid enough attention to know. But I didn't need to remember such details. I may not have seen it, but someone else did. My gaze locked onto a pair of piercing red eyes. They stared back at me with a strange intensity, and my breathing started to grow a little heavier. He most likely did. What do we do? The more I started to read, the more it became clear to me. From the fact that the language that I was speaking was English to the fact that I could control mana. This world. It wasn't the same world as mine. I had previously held some hope, but that crumbled the moment that I started to learn about mana and the strange powers contained within this body. But things were clear now. Fuck. A curse inevitably slipped from my mouth as I started to ruffle my hair in despair. This damn situation. There were so many curses that I wanted to throw in the air but had to stop myself. Recalling the way Almighty had been looking at me before, I knew that I couldn't act in such a pathetic manner. The only thing I could do was force myself to be calm and look around. I'll look around to get more answers. This was the only thing I could do in my situation. It was impossible for me to run away. Therefore, the only thing I could do was think of ways to escape. Right, I needed to run. They'll figure out the rest later. For now, I needed to focus on this. Soon, I stopped before a large blueprint. Staring at it, my nose scrunched up. My expression soon turned into one of excitement as I picked up the blueprint. But how could I not be excited? This was, after all, the blueprint of the cave system. I now knew which way to move. Leon's situation was rather delicate. Which direction should we go? I don't know. Maybe this way? He was staring at a fork road that led in 5 different directions. Behind him was a group of over 10 people, of which Kalian was a member. Somehow, Leon had managed to help him out of his chamber. Leon felt a small sense of relief with Kalian present. He was strong, and with him here, Leon didn't need to worry about his back. Evelyn was present too, which also helped him feel calm. We should head this way. Thankfully, Leon didn't need to be too worried about which way they needed to go. His instincts told him exactly which area he needed to go to. The only problem was convincing the others. Why do you want to go this way? As expected, the people from the Aurora Empire weren't exactly too keen on listening to his suggestion. They seemed rather hesitant. Evelyn frowned as she looked at them. He saved you. Shouldn't it be okay to listen to him? Look, we're grateful that you saved us. But that still doesn't mean that we should rush into one of the paths without any clue as to where we are headed. If that was the case, then we were better off not being saved. That's right. Yeah. What? Evelyn's face grew red at the sight of them. She was obviously baffled by their behavior, but just before she could say anything, Kalian raised his hand. We will do as he says. His voice was firm, and all the members of the Aurora Empire stopped speaking. Kalian looked towards Leon. Since you saved us, then you have every right to make the decisions. He glared at the people behind him. That much should be understandable. Thank you. Leon smiled and nodded at Kalian. He was glad to have found him. Reigning over those from the other empire was easy with him present, especially since he was rather sensible. Or at least, he appeared to be sensible in his actions. As Leon looked at him, he saw him look around at the group. Are you looking for someone? Ah! Kalian turned his head and looked at Leon. His expression changed a little as he nodded his head. Yes. Who exactly? Leon looked around and thought back to the two people who had been standing behind him before. He couldn't quite recall their names, but he knew who they were. I think they might be with the other team. We'll be joining up with them soon. They? Yes. Aren't you looking for your other team members? Oh yeah, that. Kalian nodded his head. His reaction made Leon frown a little. So he isn't? Then who is he? Realization soon dawned on him. Are you looking for the guy with blonde hair and blue eyes? Kalian's expression changed a little. Looks like I've hit the mark. Leon understood from there. He also remembered that cadet. How could he not when he stood out so much back then? It was just that he seemed a little different compared to the first time he had seen him. Still, considering how Kalian was acting, then he was someone of importance in one way or another. He's also likely with the other group. If we hurry then we might be able to meet them. Yes. Kalian nodded his head before looking back. Leon stared at him for a brief moment before looking towards Evelyn. Let's go. Okay. The group headed deeper into the cave system. Tack, tack, tack. The only sound they could hear was the rushed sound of their steps as the passage grew darker the deeper they went in. Thankfully, a few cadets were adept at fire magic and were able to illuminate the path forward. It was quiet, and their path was fairly unobstructed. Look. Halfway through their march, they noticed black liquid staining the ground. Leon rushed forward to take a look. It seems like we're not too far off from the other team. The liquid was fresh, he could feel it. Leon didn't waste a second and beckoned everyone with their hand. Let's go. He hurried his steps and rushed forward. Look. Along the way, head spot missing limbs and heads. Leon looked at the scene with cold eyes before picking up the pace. His heart dropped as he moved forward. I recognized those faces. There were several that belonged to people he knew. Still, he wasn't too worried. Everyone had the vials on their arms. With it, they could still revive. Right, the blood. Leon looked at it. He knew what the blood was, and yet, he didn't know the reason why the Archbishop gave them something so precious. He had a bad feeling about the blood, and for that reason acted rather cautiously. Leon was afraid that it was part of the scheme made by the Archbishop. Clank. In the distance, Leon heard the sound of metal clashing and a subtle groan. Thump. The ground cracked under his step as he picked up the speed. Fuck. Help me out. I'm struggling. I'm busy. Fuck that. Drop your shit and help me. Stupid. Kek. Is that your best insult? Leon soon arrived before the source of the sound, and he stopped to see Kira and Aoife encircled by over a dozen figures. Clank, clank. It was just the two of them, and their entire bodies were riddled with cuts and bruises. They were on the verge of losing. Leon's eyes quickly darted to look at the surroundings. He took all the information in before extending his right hand where a sword appeared. A white glow manifested over the sword as the mana around him suddenly grew dense. It all happened in less than a second, and as he gathered enough mana, he shouted. Duck. What? Aoife and Kira were startled by his shout. Nonetheless, they did as he shouted, and immediately ducked down. Swoosh. That was when a powerful wave of mana swept the air. Thump, 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 and they heard the sound of multiple bodies falling. In shock, Kira and Aoife looked up to see several bodies scattered before their very eyes. This, holy shit. HAAA. HAAA. Thump. Falling on one knee, Leon just barely managed to keep himself upright as sweat trickled down the side of his face. That move had taken every little bit of his mana as he felt that his lungs were on fire. Nonetheless, he had succeeded. He had managed to help them in the nick of time. Leon. What happened here? It was also then that the others caught up and looked at the scene with dumbfounded looks. Leon barely managed to turn his head as he forced a laugh. Since we don't have much time, I decided to go hard from the start. Don't mind it. His words were suddenly cut short by a sharp pain in his neck. Suddenly, he felt himself lose control of his body and the world turned upside down. In the last moments, he managed to catch a glimpse of one person. He seemed to be looking at him with cold eyes. Kalian? Leon's consciousness faded before he could understand what had happened. Thump, and his body fell shortly after. The entire place froze as all eyes fell on Kalian. But before anyone could process what was happening, a sharp clapping sound echoed from the distance. Clap, clap. The sound sent chills down the spines of everyone present as a man slowly stepped out from the shadows. his muddled white eyes gleaming ominously. His gaze locked onto Kalian's. You did well. Clap, clap. Stepping out of the shadows, the Archbishop's muddled white eyes scanned the surroundings before pausing on Kalian. I was a little skeptical at first, but you really did fulfill your role. Kalian merely lowered his head in acknowledgement. What's going on? This can't be true, right? The others looked at the scene dumbfounded. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. This was especially so for Evelyn, who stared at Leon's decapitated body. How could it be? Her mind was a mess and she could hardly think. Those from the Aurora Empire were no better as they looked at Kalian, their idol, in utter shock. Of all the people that could betray them, why did you do this? You were given everything. They all shouted at him in protest. They demanded answers, and they soon received their answers. Why did I do what I did? Kalian looked at them in disgust. Isn't it obvious? The atmosphere froze at his words. His voice, it was cold. So cold that everyone in the room found themselves staring at him as if he were a foreign person. We live in an empire where the strong rule and the weak die. But do you know what's the most important thing? Kalian raised his head to look at everyone as his sharp gaze pierced through the darkness that encircled their surroundings. Your life is what matters the most. How can you be strong if you die? You ask me why I took the offer. It's simple. It's because I want to live. I don't need to die in such a place. Fool. Kira mumbled from the distance. Kalian's gaze turned towards her. His brows furrowed slightly as he recalled her. Just as his mouth opened to say something, she cut him off. What makes you think he's going to let you go after everything is done? And what makes you think people won't find you suspicious when you come out of this as the sole survivor? You will obviously be kept in the Empire. You're a fool. Kira made sure to emphasize the last part. Her words held truth to them as Kalian's expression changed slightly, but as he glanced at the Archbishop, his face twisted. My value is not something that you will understand. The Empire will do everything in its power to bring me back. I'm certain of it. And what does it matter if they find it suspicious? Kalian's lips slowly pulled into a smirk. You'll all be dead by then. It'll all end in suspicion. Of course, that is unless your empire wants to wage war with mine. To that, Kira didn't have many words to say. In the end, the group was slowly surrounded by the people in white. Kira, Aoife, Evelyn, and the others huddled together as they warily looked around while they talked with one another, trying to think of ways to fight back. Unfortunately, they were all too exhausted. They could only look around them with pale faces as they tried to channel their mana. The shit again. Can you stop swearing? What? You too. Standing in the middle, the Archbishop looked at all of them as he smiled kindly. They'll see you soon. These were the last words they heard before the people in white rushed at them. Thump. It didn't take long for their world to turn black. The map was rather detailed. With just one glance, I understood exactly where I was and where I needed to proceed in order to get out of the place. So this is where I am. My position on the map was somewhat clear. Labeled as study room, it was fairly obvious. I circled it with my finger and traced the path to the exit with my finger. I thought about going out immediately, but I stopped myself. I need more information. In particular, I wanted to know more about this ring of nothingness. In case I were to be subjected to that again, I wanted to know of a way to get out of it. Flip. Flip. I flipped through multiple papers in haste, but there wasn't much information with regard to the ring. Nothing here too? I put one of the papers down and exhaled. I can't waste too much time. Time was running low, and I knew that within a few moments, someone would find this place. I was sure Almighty also knew this and was just about to turn to face its direction when from the corner of my eyes, I spotted a certain drawing. Hiding behind a stack of papers, it was hard to notice at a glance, but its color stood out. It was entirely red. Instinctively, I reached out for it and grabbed it. I didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like a magic circle, but it was filled with all sorts of runes that I could hardly comprehend. For some strange reason, the runes seemed to pulse into life as I glanced into them. It would alternate with each blink that I took. It would pulse at one blink and be totally normal at the second glance. But that wasn't the creepiest part. I felt my blood boil as I looked at the strange circle. As if pins and needles were stabbing from within my veins, every part of my body started to tingle as I felt an uncomfortable sensation run down my body. What is this? The sensation was so weird that I almost dropped the paper in my hands. I was just barely able to keep myself from doing so as I looked around and eventually found another paper. This is the one. I knew it was the right paper since it also contained a diagram of the circle. The only difference was that it wasn't red. Blood absorption circle. Just by reading the first few words, I started to have a bad feeling. My eyes darted across the paper as I quickly read through the paper. It took me no more than a couple of minutes to completely read the paper, And once I was done, I placed it down softly as I drew in a cold breath. You. In essence, it was a circle designed to absorb the blood of all those who were within the circle. The paper provided a step-by-step guide on how to operate the circle and what was required of it. I didn't need to be told who the sacrifices were. Looks like were the sacrifices. This much was obvious. But there was something else that I was curious about. Why? The paper only detailed how to operate the magic circle. It didn't exactly say what its use was for. To live longer. Turning around, Almighty dropped a book on the table. I squinted my eyes to look at the title of the book. Door of Divinity. The title stood out at a glance. The human wants to absorb your blood. Yes, I know. The circle was clear enough for me to understand. What I wanted to know was why. Why did he want to absorb my blood? You said to live longer? Are you saying that this circle extends someone's life? I don't know. Almighty shook its head, and I felt my left brow twitch slightly. But I do know about that. With its wing, Almighty pointed at my left hand where a vial appeared. I stared at it for a brief moment before coming to a realization. You know what this is? Yes, it's in the book. Almighty began to explain. According to it, this belongs to Mortem, the god of immortality. Mortem. I pondered over Almighty's words. So there are gods in this world. Considering everything that had happened, I didn't even find this to be strange. It made sense and a thought crossed my mind. Do they know of a way to send me back home? Indeed, I had died in my previous world and my body was probably not in the right state, but was it possible for me to go back with a new body? Bah, thump. The thought made my heart skip a beat. It looks like the human wants to absorb the blood from within your body. My thoughts were broken by Almighty's words. The Archbishop wants to absorb my blood? I blinked my eyes several times. That didn't quite make sense. Was my blood unique? I didn't think so. Or perhaps it was, but since this was an unfamiliar body, I didn't know. Nonetheless, I still didn't think there was anything special to this body. The only thing that I could think about was the fact that it wanted to absorb my blood that was mixed with God's blood. But why would it want to do that when he could just directly absorb the blood by himself? Considering how he had given it to us, surely he could have absorbed it by now. There was something that I was missing. Something Realization suddenly struck me as my eyes widened. Diluting. Right, this was God's blood we were talking about. If the Archbishop's desire was to live longer, then he needed to completely replace his entire body with Mortem's blood. Or at least that was what I initially thought. But upon thinking about it further, I came to a realization. The blood is too powerful to be consumed in large dosages. It needs to be diluted. And who else did he want to use to dilute the blood? Haha. I laughed at the absurdity of the situation. So that's the situation. This crazy bastard of a cultist was waiting for us to slowly absorb and dilute Mortem's blood with each of our deaths before completely absorbing our blood into his body and extending his life. Fucking sickening. It was merely a hypothesis, but the more I thought about it, the closer to the truth it was. There were still several things that didn't quite make sense. For example, why us? The Archbishop had plenty of people at his disposal for the blood ritual. Why did he select us? Maybe he's already done it to them. If so, it would make sense. I ruffled my head as more questions started to appear in my mind. Nonetheless, I knew that I didn't have much time to dwell on the matter. I need to get out of here. My eyes fell on the blueprint in front of me. Tracing my finger over the path that I needed to take, I looked towards the door and then to Almighty, who seemed to be staring at me, waiting to see what I'd do. Let's go. There was no hesitation in me. We needed to leave this place as soon as possible. Looking around, I searched through every nook and cranny of the place in search of anything important. Finding nothing, I quickly darted out of the place with the map in my hand. This way. Finding the right direction, I hurried my speed and sprinted forward. At the same time, I closed my eyes and imagined the rocky surface of the cave. My mana started to drain, and when I opened my eyes again, my skin changed completely. It looked exactly like the surface of the cave. Well, not exactly, but it was getting there. This should do. Haven. Rustle, rustle. Delilah sat on her seat while unwrapped the chocolate bars before her. There were over a dozen, and looking at the scattered wrappers everywhere, she continued to unwrap more as she gorged herself on them. Her mouth was soon covered in chocolate, but what did she care? More. Rustle. More. To talk. Chancellor. Chancellor. We've got another letter from the delegates of the Aurora Empire. Chancellor. Outside of her door, she could hear the shouts of her secretaries. They seemed desperate, and they probably were. A situation occurred. The cadets from Haven, including those from the Aurora Empire, had gone missing. CR. Crack. Delilah's desk started to crack. Just when things were going smoothly. The past 5 months had been some of the smoothest she ever had. There were some attempts here and there, but there was nothing that gave her a headache. But guess what? The moment Julian returned, her peace of mind shattered. Chancellor. To talk. Delilah groaned and stuffed a chocolate bar in her mouth. Munch. I knew it. She continued like this until there was nothing left. And that was when her expression blanked. Gone. Just like that, the chocolate bars she had bought were gone. How? Delilah stared at the wrappers with a blank look. Gaze. Should I switch to drugs? That probably wouldn't do a thing to her given that her constitution made her immune to most drugs, and those that did work were simply too costly. Why has he not used it yet? But the thing that bothered Delilah the most was the fact that Julian had yet to use the item that she had given him. Knowing that something was probably going to go wrong in his presence, Delilah took it upon herself to gift him something to use in cases of emergency. She had been waiting the entire time for him to use the item. And yet, he still hadn't used it. Swoosh. Delilah flung the wrappers aside with an expressionless face. But she was angry. Or at least she thought she was angry. So difficult. Her head started to ache. At least, she knew that she was stressed. Bang. The shouts turned into outright bangs and Delilah raised her head. Narrowing her eyes, she could see exactly what sort of expressions the people outside were making and she sighed. Looks like he won't use it. Her body started to fade. He'll get into trouble for this, but I have no choice. My surroundings were silent and I slowed my steps down as I looked at the dark path ahead of me. I could hardly hear any sound, and I tried to keep my breath at a minimum. This should be enough, right? I looked towards my arms and legs, which now looked like they were made out of the same rock as the sides of the cave. To the naked eye, it shouldn't be possible to detect me. There was only one problem. I didn't know whether it was enough to completely fool the eyes of whatever things were lurking within the cave. Stop. Almighty's voice echoed quietly. Standing on my shoulders, its red eyes gleamed beneath the darkness as they stared ahead. I hear a couple of footsteps. Bah. Thump. My heart leaped out of my chest as I hastily pursed my lips. I didn't hesitate to move to the nearby wall and adjust my cloaking to match the surroundings better. Tack tack. I could finally hear the steps and I swallowed nervously. The steps drew nearer, and I held my breath. Soon, 2 people in white appeared in my vision. With muddled looks, they walked in my general direction. I felt something lump in my throat as I continued to hold my breath. At the same time, I started to channel my mana within me in preparation for a potential conflict. Tack. The steps drew nearer. They were now a couple of meters away from me. The cave's narrow width left little room to maneuver. As they walked past, my back pressed against the cold, rough wall. I could feel the air shift with their every step as they drew nearer. My eyes widened in terror, and I stifled a gasp with my hand as their shoulders nearly brushed against mine. Tack tack. Thankfully, there were no hiccups as they walked past me. I continued to remain glued to the wall even as they walked forward, and just as I was about to sigh in relief, I heard a subtle cracking sound coming from the distance. CRA. Crack. My heart froze at the sound as I robotically turned my head to meet 2 glaring black eyes that stared in my general direction. With their necks twisted backward, they both looked behind. My stomach churned at the sight that greeted me but was just barely able to keep myself from making any movements when I realized that their gaze wasn't focused on me but on my general direction. Or at least I hoped. The silence was defeating. Perhaps it was my imagination, but I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat echo loudly within the cave. I stood frozen on the spot while staring back at the pair of black eyes. I thought that my heart would collapse on me due to the anxiety, but somehow, and in some way, I was able to persist until their necks returned to normal. CRA. Crack. Sweat trickled down the side of my face as their backs retreated into the darkness. It was only after several minutes had passed that I finally sighed in relief and relaxed. You should have killed them. But of course, Almighty wasn't going to let me relax. I turned my head to look at the owl. What do you mean? The moment they passed you. That was your chance to end things. But you've wasted valuable time. If it was Julian, he would have killed them right the moment they passed him before carrying forward. My expression hardened. What does that have to do with me? I am not him. It was absurd that I was continuously being compared to a guy that I didn't know anything about. Unlike me, he was used to this world. How did they expect me to act the same way as him? I was learning. It doesn't matter. You're wasting time again. Clenching my fists, I held back all the words that I wanted to say and turned around to head in the direction of where the church was. At the same time, I glanced at the map one more time. The general layout of the cave system wasn't very complicated. It was a series of tunnels that branched out like roots until eventually coming to a stop deep down. It sounded complicated, but just like all roots, they all combined to lead to one single path. The exit. Or in this case, the church. Located right above the cave system, the church was where I needed to go in order to exit this forsaken place. Tack tack. As the steps faded, I looked to my left and held my breath. I was now very close to reaching the church. With the aid of Veil of Deceit, I was able to avoid getting caught and managed to find my way towards the very top. Strangely quiet. Before, several explosions had rang throughout the place. The explosions came from the others trying to escape, but the sounds didn't last for very long before subsiding. There could only be two explanations for such a situation. One, they had all managed to escape, and two, I licked my lips. They've been caught. I hoped that it was the former, but a part of me knew that it was the latter. In that case, should I save them? The thought ran through my mind for a brief moment before I shook my head. No, that doesn't make sense. I can hardly take care of myself. How can I, in the right mind, be able to save them? I quickly discarded the thought of saving them rather quickly. Everyone was a stranger to me. Not only that, but I could hardly survive on my own. How could I even entertain the thought of saving them? I felt a little sorry, but there was no chance for me to save them. We're close. Almighty spoke from my shoulder. It would appear and disappear whenever it wanted to. I was starting to get used to its strange actions. My steps slowed and I evened out my breathing. The path was still dark, and I could barely see what was ahead. However, I trusted Almighty knew what it was talking about. For that reason, I started to get myself ready. Be careful. I can sense quite a few forces up ahead. I see. I nervously nodded. Just one person was hard for me to handle. Multiple? I felt dread quickly crawl up my mind. However, I had no choice but to continue forward. My steps were light and so was my breath. Fortunately, I didn't encounter anyone on the way up and I soon saw a bright light up ahead. There. Covering my eyes, I slowed my steps further and made sure to camouflage myself better with the environment. It was only when I was confident with my appearance that I moved forward. We will be starting the ritual soon. Is there anyone missing? Yes, just one. Oh, one? Do your best to find them. We don't want any unwanted SIO. Looks like someone is awake. Drawing closer, I could hear a few voices in the distance. I slowed my pace further and moved towards the door that led to the church. There, I spotted a couple of people coming out. Tack, tack. Their steps echoed quietly as they moved in my general direction. Holding on to my breath, I stuck to the wall and waited for them to pass before moving forward and taking a peek to get a better look at what was happening. Something clamped at my throat as I stared at the sight that greeted me. Everyone was present. Locked onto the wooden rows, they sat with their heads lowered as the archbishop stood in the middle, staring at the altar in the middle. At the altar, I spotted a familiar circle and my heart almost leaped out of my chest. As expected, I need to get out of here. The ritual was about to start, and I didn't have much time. I was just about to move back and think of a solution on how to get out when suddenly my eyes locked onto a pair. My entire body froze at that moment. Leon awoke with a massive headache. Every part of his body ached, and his mind was numbed as he tried his best to recall the circumstances that led to his current situation. Cage? His expression twisted the moment that he recalled and his eyes flared open in anger. That fucking traitor. His chest boiled over as he felt his body stiffen. In the last moments, he remembered getting backstabbed by Kalian. That bastard. It was hard to describe the anger that Leon was currently feeling, but had it not been for him, they would have had a chance at escaping. Cage? Leon tried to move his body but found himself constrained. Yet again, his mana was sealed, and no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't move at all. Looks like someone is awake. A deep and brittle voice echoed throughout. Finally, Leon raised his head and his expression crumbled at the sight that greeted him. Here again, he was back in the church. Not only him but everyone else that had accompanied him. They were all currently chained to the wooden rows that faced the massive altar in the middle. There, Leon could see a blood-red circle at the center as it glowed ominously. The glow seemed to throb in time with his own racing heartbeat, filling him with a sense of impending dread. What is that? Staring at the circle, Leon felt an ominous feeling. He wasn't sure about what exactly it did, but every part of his body screamed danger. Are you curious about what that is? The archbishop spoke while staring at him. Leon raised his head to match his gaze. He didn't say anything and remained quiet. It was such defiance that made the archbishop smile. What you see is merely the start of the cleanse. Each and every one of you will be subjected to it. But before that, the archbishop raised his hand and stared at his ring. Leon frowned at his behavior, but before he could even say a thing, the archbishop looked around in happiness. Looks like more people are waking up. Good. This is a good thing. Indeed. Looking around, Leon noticed the others slowly waking up. What's going on? Where am I? They had looks of confusion on their faces as they woke up, and Leon's expression sank when in the corner of the room, he spotted a certain figure standing by the corner with an expressionless look. It's the traitor. Leon clenched his teeth tightly at the sight of him. He wasn't the only one who spotted him, with the others also showing similar expressions. But Kalian stood in the same spot without much of a change in his expression. It was as if he hadn't noticed them at all. Leon felt his blood boil at the sight, but he forced himself to calm down. It's not over yet. There were still several things that he could do to get out of the situation. For that reason, taking a couple of deep breaths, Leon's expression turned sharp. He looked around before suddenly freezing. His eyes locked towards a certain corner. Two blue eyes stared back at him. Isn't that? Leon's heart froze for a split second as he processed the situation. Soon, his eyes widened. He made it here. Leon was a little surprised, but he soon calmed down. He looked around him and narrowed his eyes. Something soon became clear to him. There's a chance that he isn't here to save us, but rather, he's here to escape by himself. Leon wouldn't blame him if he did so. He held no expectations in the first place. He had already seen the true faces of some of the people from the Aurora Empire. In the first place, they were a nation that respected the strong and prioritized their well-being at the expense of others. There was simply no way for them to think about helping others unless it benefited them. For that reason, Leon felt his heart sink. So in the end, nothing changes. Leon's expression turned grim. Still, the situation wasn't all too bad for him. In fact, it could turn well in his favor. I can free myself if I want to. The real question is what to do after. I think I know what to do now. Leon closed his eyes and pretended to look away. At the same time, he started to think of the best timing. The best timing to reveal his appearance. The moment our gazes met, for a brief moment, I thought he was going to reveal my appearance to the Archbishop. I felt my entire body stiffen up at the thought. However, it was much to my surprise to see him turn his head around and ignore my presence. Does he expect me to save him? Was that the reason why he turned his attention away from me? I pursed my lips. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. I don't have the skills necessary to do such a thing. I took a deep breath before leaning back against the exit. I was careless. The fact that he had spotted me meant that I had almost exposed myself to everyone. I was lucky that the person who spotted me was one of the people who had been kidnapped into this place. Otherwise, Almighty was gone, but I could already imagine the look it was giving me. Closing my eyes, I started to focus on my appearance and clothing. My mind wandered back to the two people that had left moments prior and my appearance started to change. It took several minutes for my appearance to stabilize, and only then did I finally stand up and mustered up the courage to move beyond the door and enter the church. Tack! The moment I stepped into the church, my footfall echoed loudly through the hollow space, echoing off the walls. The sound was jarringly loud, making me almost cringe as it disrupted the oppressive atmosphere, heightening the sense of unease that settled over me. It took every bit of my willpower to keep my face from changing. I sighed in relief once I saw that the Archbishop was still staring at the altar with his back turned against me. Having already analyzed the situation beforehand, I knew what I needed to do and moved towards the far ends of the church and stood next to the other followers. I kept my back straight as I did, and in the process, my eyes darted across the room in hopes of finding the exit of the place. Where is it? Where is it? It's nice to see that everyone is slowly coming to their senses. The Archbishop suddenly spoke, drawing my attention. I kept my expression firm as I strained to listen, every word of his seemingly keeping me on my toes. For some reason, it almost felt as though they were directed at me. There were a few hiccups here and there, but we're all here and that is all that matters. His gaze never left the altar as he spoke, and it was at that moment that I laid my eyes on it. Just like in the picture, it pulsed in a deep red glow. As if entranced, I found myself staring at it longer than I should have and only managed to catch myself when I noticed a few glances directed at my eyes. I swallowed in silence and looked away. Unfortunately, those gazes persisted. In fact, they grew more numerous as the back of my neck started to tingle. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. The preparations are almost ready. All that is left is for everyone to undergo the trail of the forgotten mines for one last time. Finally, the Archbishop turned around, revealing his murky white eyes. In that moment, I nearly lost my breath as his gaze locked onto me briefly before shifting toward the other cadets. I've separated you all in certain rows to distinguish those that still have more than 2/2 of the blood in their body from those that only have 1/4 left. The Archbishop's gaze scanned the first row. 14 already down to their last life. He suddenly smiled while looking at them. He had just raised his hand and was about to do something when a voice interrupted him. Wait. All eyes turned in the direction of where the voice came from. It's him. I recognized the one responsible in an instant. With gray eyes and handsome features, it was hard not to miss him. Oh? The Archbishop turned his attention towards the grayed person. For some reason, staring at him, I started to have a bad feeling as the sweat that had accumulated on the side of my face grew more pronounced. It can't be, right? What are you planning on doing? He spoke, staring at the Archbishop with his intense gray eyes. Maybe not. Thankfully, my worries didn't seem to come true. At least not yet. I couldn't be too certain just yet. Me? Isn't it obvious? The Archbishop turned to look towards the altar. His expression shifted, turning more fanatical as he looked toward the pulsing magic circle. I'm trying to get closer to my God. I've been preparing for the past few decades, and now, everything is almost ready. You all will be the catalyst for my ascension, and so you should rejoice. His voice reverberated loudly within the confines of the church. You can think of it as an honor. He's completely lost it. I drowned out the noise from the fanatic as I looked around the place and tried to look for the exit. Having glanced at the map beforehand, I knew that it was here, but no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see where it was. Hidden? Was the exit hidden? The thought crossed my mind and I looked in the general direction of where the exit was labeled to be. My heart sank when I noticed that it was right behind the altar. That's annoying. It was, but what other choice did I have? I needed to think of ways to sneak behind and reach the exit. There must be some sort of secret lever or way that can help me reach the exit. I licked my lips, which had gone dry. How certain are you that you're going to succeed? Ha ha ha. The Archbishop suddenly laughed, his voice slowly subsiding into a cold snort. I've been preparing for quite a long time. All preparations have been made accordingly. You can give up hope in trying to waste time in hopes of getting reinforcements to find you. Even the strongest person will struggle to find you. Silence ensued following the Archbishop's words. I stared at the grayed person. He didn't seem to be looking at me, and yet, at the same time, I felt like his gaze was directed at me. It didn't make sense, but it brought a certain sense of urgency within me. I need to figure out how to get out now. Like I said, he soon started to speak, his even tone sending chills down my body. How certain are you that everything will go smoothly? Slowly, two gray eyes locked in my general direction, and I felt my entire body stiffen on the spot. Meeting his gaze, he smiled and my heart sank, especially when someone managed to infiltrate the place without you knowing. How certain are you that everything will go smoothly? Leon felt a little apologetic about his actions, but in order to ensure his survival alongside that of the others, he had no choice but to do so. And thus, locking eyes with the Archbishop, he continued, especially when someone managed to infiltrate the place without you knowing. Leon's gaze turned to face the back where one of the people in white appeared. He looked no different than them, but Leon was sure that it was the blue-eyed cadet from before. The timing was too perfect, and there were subtle differences between the way he acted and the others. But that wasn't the biggest giveaway. The biggest giveaway was his eyes. They were simply too clear for him to be part of the cult. Oh? The Archbishop looked in the direction of where he was looking at with interest. Are you saying that someone shouldn't belong here? In the moment that the Archbishop was distracted, Leon focused his entire attention on his inner body and worked to control his mana to kill the parasite that was residing within his heart. He could feel sweat form rapidly as he did so. It was a race against time and he didn't have much time. He could only hope that he had managed to buy himself enough time. Enough time to, sadly I already knew. A change took place in the surroundings. The people garbed in white that surrounded them all turned to look in a particular direction. Leon's expression stiffened slightly. Turning his head, his gaze met with everyone's center of attention. His current expression was difficult to describe. It was a mixture of anger, fear, and frustration. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to spot you? The Archbishop spoke, his attention focused on the intruder. At the same time, Leon stifled a groan as he felt something sharp press his heart. He had just gotten rid of the centipede and was just recovering his mana. A little more. The Archbishop's attention was now fully focused on the intruder. For that reason, he wasn't noticing anything abnormal from him. This was what Leon wanted. He had used the intruder in order to buy himself such a distraction. Almost. Just a little. Gradually, Leon felt his mana start to recover, and as he did, he looked around him. He could see the others look at him with questionable looks as they alternated their gaze between him and the intruder. Leon held his breath and continued to channel the mana around his body. It was currently shackled, but the shackles weren't anything impressive. All he needed to do was gather enough mana to break them down. He was slowly building up to that, but he just needed some time. He'll get the others out after that. Leon was sure that the mysterious cadet from the Aurora Empire was strong. He held such a feeling back when he had seen him for the first time. It was for this reason that Leon believed the mysterious student would be able to buy him enough time to remove the shackles from the other cadets in order to give them a fighting chance. Or maybe I should start by attacking the Archbishop. There was also that option, but he found it to be harder. Despite being weak, Leon felt like the Archbishop had multiple cards up his sleeve. It was a risky gamble that he wasn't too keen on taking. Taking a deep breath, Leon calmed his heartbeat. 1 minute. I need 1 minute. The sudden turn of the situation attracted the attention of everyone within the room. Kira and Aoife both turned in the direction of where the source came from, their expression changing slightly. There was someone else? When did he get here? They both looked at Leon in surprise. He didn't look at them and seemed to be lost in his own thoughts. I was waiting to see what you were planning on doing, but it seems like the people over here don't want to see you succeed. The Archbishop spoke while staring at the intruder. At the same time, he quietly glanced in Leon's direction. Aoife also looked at Leon. Why did he do that? She didn't seem to understand his decision to do that. Even if he wasn't here to save them, wouldn't it be good if he managed to escape? In that case, he would be able to lead the rescue squad to where they were and save them. Aoife thought that his actions were reckless. And yet, she also seemed to understand them as her gaze fell on a particular man who stood by the side without so much of a change in his expression. He might have lost trust in them because of him. What sort of deal did he strike with the Archbishop in order for him to betray them? Or was it possible that he had the intent of betraying them from the start? Aoife felt her headache at the thought. If it was the latter, then it was quite a troublesome situation for the Empire. But then again, seeing that the other cadets from the same Empire were in the same situation as her, there was a chance that it was just something he had done individually. At least that was how things seemed to be right now. Pissed. Aoife's thoughts were broken by Kira, who was sitting not so far from where she was. Aoife glanced at her. What? Any idea on how to get out of here? No. Aoife shook her head. She was thinking though. No matter how hard she tried to think, her mind remained frustratingly blank. She couldn't come up with a single plan to escape the restraints, nor could she fathom how to remove the device shackling their mana. Panic began to creep in, her thoughts slipping further away as they started to wander elsewhere. Would things have been different had he been here? In this sort of situation, emotive mages would have come in handy. She certainly didn't think that they would have fallen for the first trick in the forest had he been present. He would have been able to tell at a glance that something was wrong with his skills. Where is that bastard when you need him? It didn't seem like she was the only one that thought like this. Kira also thought the same. In fact, his skills would have been pretty useful in this situation too. They still had their memories of the time they had been not the illusion back in the mirror dimension. They both had seen what he was capable of. If he was capable of escaping from such a secure place, surely he was capable of doing so here. No use thinking about it. Aoife was quick to discard such thoughts from her mind. There were no what-ifs, and there was also no guarantee that he would have actually been able to help at all. Plus, he had been gone for so long. It was impossible for him to help. Fuck, think faster, princess. Stop distracting me. With all the attention directed elsewhere, the two were more free to speak, but they still kept it low. Or at least, that was until a powerful explosion resounded throughout. Bang! It echoed loudly throughout, startling everyone present. When Aoife and Kira turned their heads, they were shocked to see the figures in white robes hunched slightly, revealing the features of a young man with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked pale and his breathing was rough. In the distance, the Archbishop stood still watching the entire situation with his muddled white eyes. No, this won't do. He glanced at his hand where a ring rested. It looks like I need to speed up the process. The situation flipped on me so fast that I barely had any time to react. The moment that the Archbishop's attention was focused on me, I didn't waste too much time and pressed my foot against the ground and activated Step of Suppression. It didn't do much, but it helped me by some valuable time. In the moment that all those around me were affected by the sudden increase in gravity, I dashed away from the spot that I was on. My mind started to race in all sorts of ways as I tried to think of which way to go. Main exit, or the exit near the altar. I came up with the decision rather quickly. Just as I turned to look at the main exit, I spotted several figures rushing in and my expression stiffened. Yeah, no other choice. I turned to look in the direction of where the altar was. I need to find the exit. Without looking back, I sprinted towards the altar. My body felt sluggish and my lungs burned as I rushed with all my might, but I grit my teeth and persisted. Looking up, I scanned what was ahead. The altar stood in the center, dominated by the strange magic circle that pulsated rhythmically. Each pulse seemed to beat as if it were its own heart. I felt the back of my neck tingle at the sight but kept my expression fixed on what was behind. It was there that my eyes fell upon an enormous pipe organ. Its towering pipes loomed upwards, casting long shadows that stretched down beneath the altar. A thought ran down my mind. What if the exit is behind the organs? My mind halted at the thought. How would that even work? Would I need to break it, or play a certain tune in order to unlock the exit? My hands tensed as I stared ahead and I started to think of all sorts of ways to break the pipe organ. But as I inched closer to the organ, I realized something. I can't break this. None of my abilities could do that. I felt my chest tingle with anxiety as I continued to inch closer to the pipe organ, my mind racing with all sorts of thoughts as I tried to think of a way to get out of this situation, and just as I drew right next to the organ, I stopped. When? My heart sank. Standing right before me were multiple people in white. With blank looks, they all stared at me, their muddled looks bearing down on me as I tried to bring up the intensity of step of suppression to the maximum. It's an interesting skill you have, but you can give up now. The Archbishop's voice echoed from behind me. There was something about his calm voice that unsettled me, making my breath even rougher. Despite the situation that I was in, I didn't give up and continued to look. Look for ways to get out of the situation. And yet, nothing. There was nothing. My heart sank further down my chest. Despair. I was slowly starting to feel it. This situation. It wasn't one that I was meant to get out of in the first place. At the very least, not the current me. Give up. The Archbishop spoke, his voice slowly entering my ears. It'll make it painless. Almost. Leon bit his lips while staring at the mysterious cadet in the distance. He was currently cornered, surrounded on all sides by the people in white. Leon could tell from a glance that the Archbishop planned on killing him, and thus, he hurried up. It wasn't so much that he wanted to save the cadet since he still seemed to have a few lives left, but it was more about the fact that he wouldn't have much time following his death. Closing his eyes, Leon focused his entire attention on his body and directed his focus toward his heart where the centipede was. The centipede coiled around his heart, its many legs digging in as it latched on tightly, blocking the passage of energy from his mana core situated at the center of his abdomen. Furrowing his brows, Leon felt a sharp throb in his head. The veins across his body pulsed with a blue light as he activated the chalice that rested within his heart. The energy surged through him, each pulse intensifying the pain that he felt. Nevertheless, he continued to focus on the mana channels and the centipede. It didn't take long for him to find a connection. I got it. Immediately, the centipede began to squirm as the blue pulse enveloped it, its grip on Leon's heart loosening. The creature writhed and squirmed as it released its hold, its many legs flailing desperately against the surge of energy that Leon threw at it. Leon felt an immediate sense of relief as he did so, but it didn't take long for him to yet again feel pain as his eyes flared open. Drip, drip. Leon stifled a groan as he felt a sharp pain in his heart, forcing something wet to trickle down the side of his mouth. Leon didn't need to look to know what it was. That hurts. The pain was soon accompanied by an unsettling sensation as he felt something crawling up his throat. His expression twisted in horror as 1,000 tiny legs skittered inside his mouth. To make matters worse, as he looked around, he could feel the gazes of several people in white lock onto him. Him being watched. Despite all the attention still focused on the mysterious cadet, there were still several people in white looking out after them. Leon understood that he had no choice but to stay still without making any rash movements. Therefore, crunch, crunch. A bitter sensation washed over his tongue as he chewed slowly. His entire body tingled with disgust as the strange, slimy goo coated the inside of his mouth, each swallow being one swallow away from a gag. Crunch. He persisted and eventually swallowed everything down. Leon felt like puking on the spot but managed to hold himself back as he started to circulate the mana inside of his body. Immediately, he felt his body cool off as he directed his attention towards the shackles that were binding his body. CLI click. Subtly, he heard clicking sounds. Immediately, his head rolled up to see if anybody had noticed a thing. He felt several gazes on him, and he felt his breath leave his body. He sat rigidly in his spot without making a single sound. The gazes were firmly locked onto him, making him feel suffocated. It was as though two hands were gripping his throat tightly, making it hard for him to breathe. The gazes continued to persist, and Leon knew that he had no choice but to ignore them. At least for now, nothing. He took a deep breath before looking at the person who sat next to him. Leon pursed his lips at the sight of him and turned to his left, where another person sat. His expression turned grim. Of all people, them, the two top seats of the Aurora Empire. Aiden and Jessica. Leon felt his heart squirm in annoyance, especially since he didn't feel like he could trust them. Kalian had pretty much broken all the trust that he had with them. However, looking at them, he felt his thoughts change. Maybe it's possible. The way they were currently looking at Kalian was as if they were looking at the lowest scum in the entire world. Leon could tell from a glance that they wanted nothing but to kill him, and it was such a sight that made him change his mind. Well, it wasn't as if he had much of a choice to begin with. Secretly letting out a long sigh, Leon went on to hold the hands of both of them. What the? The two flicked their attention towards him, but Leon kept his gaze firm and looked ahead without making a sound. Quiet. He slowly whispered. What? Obviously, the two wanted to protest, but Leon channeled a little bit of his mana into them, and the two immediately stopped what they were doing. As if they suddenly understood what was happening, Their expressions turned stern as they looked away from him. Good, it looks like they get it. Leon sighed in relief as he looked at the people in white who stood at the back. They were still expressionless, staring at him without making a single sound. Leon didn't know whether he had been caught or not, but he had no time to think about such matters as he slowly channeled his mana into the two and directed it toward their hearts. He slowly started to speak as he did so. Eat it. Don't make a sound. Free others after. He spoke as low as possible and made sure to emphasize the first part. In order to not get caught, they had no choice but to eat the centipede that was soon going to crawl up their mouths. As expected, the moment he relayed the plan to them, their expressions turned slightly into one of disgust. Still, that was all that happened as they soon accepted their fates and squeezed his hand back in affirmation. Good. Leon felt more at ease as he closed his eyes and focused all of his mana on their bodies and their hearts. The process wasn't a difficult one. With his mana free, it didn't take long for him to lock onto their hearts and make the centipede squirm away from it. The expressions of the two changed the moment the centipede left their hearts as blood dripped from the corners of their mouths. Drip. Drop. Leon soon heard crunching noises as their jaws moved slightly, biting and chewing the remains of the centipede. It was unfortunate that he couldn't see their reactions as he didn't want to arouse too much attention, but he could tell that their faces were completely white from disgust, especially the girl on his left who gripped his hand extremely tightly. Thankfully, it didn't last for too long, and they were soon done as Leon heard swallowing sounds from them. Their breaths were slightly heavy, but it was insignificant. Leon finally glanced at them for a brief moment, and he could tell that they were trying to free themselves from the restraints. That process was also quick, and once they were done, the two of them repeated exactly what he did to the people next to them. Good, it's working. Leon sighed in relief at the situation. The plan was rather simple. In the time that the attention was focused on the mysterious cadet, he wanted to free as many people as possible to buy them a chance to fight back. The plan was great, but there was only one problem. Thump. The mysterious cadet. He didn't last as long as Leon expected him to. Hearing a low thumping sound, Leon felt his heart drop as he looked up. No way. He watched as a head rolled on the ground, and his heart sank. He didn't even put up much of a resistance. The Archbishop's words followed shortly after as Leon felt his entire body freeze. The same was true for the people next to him. Oh, but by some miracle, the Archbishop still seemed to be interested in the mysterious cadet as he lowered his body and rummaged through the cadet's belongings. That was when he found a strange blueprint. Almost immediately, the Archbishop's expression showed signs of change. What's this? He opened the blueprint, and his expression turned extremely cold as he glanced at the cadet's body, which slowly started to squirm as a head began to form. Someone has been in my study room without my permission. The Archbishop's tone was cold, extremely cold. There were times when he had displayed such coldness in his tone, but it was different this time. Leon could feel his skin crawl at the tone as he urged the people beside him to hurry up. He knew that the situation was about to turn for the worse, and, as expected, he was right as the Archbishop's gaze flicked in their general direction. Did I mistreat any of you? The Archbishop spoke, his white and muddled eyes locking onto each and every one of them. None of the people present responded. All eyes locked on him. Seeing as no one is responding, I take it that no one thinks I've mistreated them. Leon felt like rolling his eyes. If not for the urgency of the situation, he would have done so. I think I've been far too lenient on all of you. The reason why I allowed you so much freedom was because I knew that by the time this was over, you'd join me. And you will. Of course, you will. Nonetheless, it seems like I've been far too lenient with all of you. I haven't made it clear to everyone what happens when you cross the line. The Archbishop lowered his head and grabbed the mysterious cadet by the hair as his head had already started to regrow. With his other hand, the ring he wore suddenly glowed, and Leon swallowed his saliva. But at the same time, he started to feel more relieved. This is good. It might buy us even more time. So long as they had more time, then he was sure he could free more people and have a fighting chance in all of this. Leon felt his heart beat faster at the thought, and just for a brief moment, he thought he might just very well succeed. Sadly, all his hopes crashed down the moment he felt the Archbishop's gaze on him. Leon felt his entire body grow cold at the sight of those eyes, and he held his breath. HM? Leon watched as the Archbishop suddenly frowned. Time seemed to slow down for Leon at that moment as his heart stopped beating. He could feel his entire body grow tense, and the same appeared to be true for the people beside him. No, I have no choice. Leon didn't waste a single second. At that moment, he understood that his cover had been blown, and he didn't hesitate to stand. Now, he extended his hand where a sword appeared. Innate. Sword materialization. It was an innate skill of his that allowed him to create swords out of mana, and as he gripped the hilt of the sword, He didn't hesitate to swing it in the direction of the archbishop as a wave of pressurized mana burst out from it. Swoosh. The moment Leon slashed, he felt his entire body strain due to the power he had used. He had put everything into that move, and his legs started to give out. She. With heavy breaths, he looked ahead and stared directly at the archbishop, who seemed unaware of what was happening. Yes, it might hit. Leon felt his heart quicken at the realization, and he secretly swallowed his saliva as he started to recuperate his mana quickly. His attack cleaved across the church, and within seconds, it appeared before the archbishop, who stood still the entire time. Almost. Leon stared at the scene with open eyes. He didn't want to miss it. He was close. The attack was getting closer. The attack was PFTTT. Blood sprayed everywhere, and Leon's eyes widened. Thump. Several bodies fell right before the archbishop, blood pooling around the area where their bodies lay. What? Leon felt his entire body freeze at the sight as he looked at the people on the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted 5. All of them were dead, lying beneath the archbishop, who raised his head slowly to look at Leon, who felt his heart sink. Couldn't be, right? You took me by surprise. The archbishop finally spoke, and Leon felt his muscles stiffen as he struggled to keep himself upright. The mana inside his body was almost completely drained. Looking around, he could see more people in white moving around the archbishop in some form of shield, blocking any possible attacks. Leon bit his lips at the sight. It really does look like I've mistreated all of you, the archbishop said as he looked at the floor where the bodies lay. For such devoted disciples to fall like this pains my heart. The archbishop put on a pained expression as he turned around, shifting his attention toward the mysterious cadet who was now back to normal. Leon didn't understand what he was planning, but he soon understood as the archbishop leaned down and removed the vial from the cadet's body before sprinkling it over the dead bodies. For such loyalty, I must naturally reward them. CRA crack. Coming to life, the bodies squirmed on the ground as cracking sounds echoed, twisting grotesquely in the air. Their limbs contorted and cracked, the 5 bodies beginning to merge into a single form. Arms and legs bent at unnatural angles, flesh fusing and warping as the corpses were drawn together by some strange force that originated from the blood that was sprayed on them. Squelch. A sickening squelch accompanied every movement, and a foul stench filled the air as skin, bone, and muscle melded into a horrific amalgamation. Cracka. It was a gruesome sight that Leon could hardly describe as the expressions of everyone changed. It looks like there wasn't enough blood. The archbishop sighed as he looked at the creature before him. Pressing his hand against the creature, which was a combination of 5 people, he looked towards the cadets. More specifically, towards Leon, who felt himself standing rigidly on the spot as anxiety started to grow within him. It's a good thing that we have plenty of blood. The ritual may not be as effective, but I can just use you. Yes, let's do this. The archbishop pointed in Leon's direction. Get his blood. Eek. As if it were agreeing, the creature turned in Leon's direction as its limbs flung around with each one of its movements. Leon stepped back and looked around him. His expression brightened when he saw that several cadets had been freed during the time he had attacked the archbishop. In particular, he was happy about the fact that Evelyn, Aoife, Kira, Josephine, and Luxon were included. They were strong, and with them helping, Leon felt less stressed about the situation. Eek. The creature lunged onto the side of the wall, its many limbs skittering with a chilling speed. Despite its grotesque size, it moved with an eerie nimbleness, darting across the surface like a monstrous insect. Within seconds, it was upon Leon. Fast, heart pounding, he raised his sword and thrust it forward, the blade gleaming in the dim light as it aimed for the creature that was lunging at him. His blade hissed as it darted right for its head. Clank. Sparks flew the moment Leon's sword made contact with the creature, and his expression changed as he was pushed back several meters, crashing onto the wooden rows. Yuk. Leon spat out blood as his entire body ached. Leon. In the distance, he could see the worried looks from the others as they rushed in the direction of the creature, which seemed to be entirely focused on him. Swoosh. Flames burst through as they thrust forward and headed towards the creature. Cracka. At the same time, bolts of lightning burst out from nowhere and headed towards the creature, which tried to dodge but stopped as Aoife raised her hands. Boom. A powerful explosion reverberated throughout as the attacks landed. Leon clenched his fist at the sight, and for a brief moment, he thought they had managed to defeat it but was soon disappointed to see the creature come out of the smoke. Eek. It wasn't completely unharmed, with several of its limbs missing, but it was still strong, and Leon felt his heart sink. Clank. Clank. In the distance, he could hear the sound of fighting. When he looked, he saw the cadets holding back several people in white as the others freed the other cadets. Help. Help me. I need help. Blood spilled all over the place as bodies fell from both sides. The situation looked dire, and when Leon's head turned away from them, he saw the creature standing a few meters away from him. Clank. Leon tried to fight back, but he was completely outclassed. His mana was drained, and regardless of what he tried, he found himself being pushed back. His back crashed against one of the wooden rows as he let out another pained groan. Crap. Leon slowly looked up. The creature was now standing right above him, its many eyes locked onto him. It was at this moment that Leon felt despair. He looked at the vial in his hand and knew that he had only one chance left. The creature was looking to take his blood. Therefore, clenching his teeth, Leon decisively brought the sword near his throat and slid it in one go. PFTT. Leon. In the last moments, Leon could hear the shouts of the others as they called for him. He wanted to say something back but found himself unable to. So he looked at them. Protect me while I revive. Don't let it get my blood. Such was what his gaze meant as his consciousness started to fade. In those last moments, Leon felt a little bitter. I hope they get my intentions. He wasn't too sure. If only he was still here. There was one person Leon was sure would have gotten his message through just a look. He was someone he served and a person Leon found himself starting to miss. Had he been here? Would the situation have been resolved? Leon didn't know, but he felt like things wouldn't have gotten to this point with him. In the end, his thoughts were broken by an endless darkness that took his consciousness. In that moment, Leon died again. Leon's death was followed by a roar of anger. It came directly from the Archbishop, who looked in his direction with visible anger on his face. How dare you? His plan had been to use Leon's share of the blood to help his followers, but with him having used it, it was no longer an option. Staring in Leon's direction, the Archbishop could already see the blood entering his system. The 5 formed followers stopped the moment Leon killed himself. Bang! In the background, the Archbishop could see the people he had brought in fighting desperately, and more blood started to spill on the ground. The entire surrounding was filled with chaos, and the Archbishop stared at the scene with bloodshot eyes. It shouldn't be like this. How did it turn like this? He started to mumble to himself as he took in the sight around him and deeply imprinted it in his mind. His plan was perfect. He had been waiting for over a decade for all of this to happen, and he had perfectly laid out his trap to get over a dozen extremely talented Youtha in order to optimize his ascension. He had also found a perfect hideout that was outside of everyone's sight. He wasn't worried about anyone finding him, and yet, the Archbishop screamed in anger. In particular, his anger was directed towards a certain few who put up a struggle and killed his devoted followers. Swoosh! Fire burst forth. Cracka! Lighting crackled. Crack! And several followers were squeezed into a pulp as their arms and legs were stretched and compressed. The situating. It wasn't looking good. The Archbishop could feel himself losing control of the situation, and looking in the distance, he could see the cadet responsible for all of this slowly start to regenerate and wake up. I can't let it end like this. Not like this. Clenching his teeth, the Archbishop felt something trickle down the side of his eyes. He looked down to see black tears had started to form. His breathing started to roughen at the sight. His body, it was starting to break down. The black tear was a reminder of it. In truth, he was extremely old. He had lived for an uncountable amount of time. Due to his lack of talent, he wasn't able to grow in terms of power, but the blood he had found managed to keep him alive until now. But there was a limit to it. It was for that reason that he had devised this plan. It was so that he could live longer and grow strong. Right, it's not over yet. He hadn't planned for so long for nothing. Clank, clank, clank. Looking around, the Archbishop laid his eyes on his followers who were fighting against the cadets. The situation was even on both ends, but he knew the stalemate wouldn't last for long. Therefore, clenching his teeth tightly, he raised his hand and shouted, "Prove your loyalty to me. Eliminate everyone present." His words reverberated throughout the church, making their way towards the ears of all present. Kira and the others stopped as they looked at the Archbishop. What in the world is he talking about? What does he? Her words were quickly cut off at the sight before her as her eyes widened. She was quick to react, channeling all her mana in front of her to cast a shield. But despite her speed, she wasn't fast enough as the person she was fighting suddenly inflated and, bang, exploded on the spot. Her scream echoed through as Aoife looked in her direction in shock. What the fuck? Unknowingly, she cursed on the spot. She was just about to say something else when she also felt something off and her expression changed dramatically. Looking in front of her, her mana flowed quickly as she cast a shield before herself. This, bang, another explosion echoed. Such explosion was followed by another and then another. Bang, Bang bang. The surroundings shook, and everything started to collapse. The archbishop took in the sight before him with a blank expression. From the pillars that held the room upright to the organ near him, he watched as everything he had built slowly started to collapse before his very eyes. Bang. But what brought him out of the state was a subtle groan that came from behind him, and he turned his head and locked eyes with the cadet from before. The sneaky one. Bang. In the chaos, he smiled at the cadet who looked around in shock. It's over, the archbishop said. You've lost. Delilah's body gently hovered over a large forest. Her face was expressionless as she scanned the surroundings. Nothing. And it was much to her disappointment that she saw nothing. She felt her head throb at the thought. Why does this keep happening? She had entertained the thought before, but now it was clearer to her than ever. Julian. He shouldn't be allowed to leave the academy. He was a walking disaster. Whenever he was present, trouble occurred. The fact that the last 5 months had been the most peaceful she had had over the past year was the perfect proof of this. Delilah closed her eyes and sighed. She was just about to leave when her expression changed slightly as her gaze flicked back. A powerful aura burst forth from the distance, heading straight towards her. Looking at it, Delilah felt her heart sink, but she remained firm on the spot without making any rash movements. You! A figure soon stopped in front of her. With a rough, muscular body covered in scars, fiery red hair that seemed to crackle like flames, and piercing yellow eyes that burned with intensity, he looked at her with a menacing glare. What are you doing here? His tone was anything but friendly as he addressed her, and Delilah could only lower her head slightly. One of the 7 monarchs, Delilah Vahay Rosenberg, greets the royal guard, Joseph Megrail. Despite her actions, her tone was anything but subservient as the man before her frowned. Although he was a member of the Branch family, he was still a member of the Megrail family. He knew all about Delilah's deeds and what she had done on that day. There was no one from the Megrail family that didn't know about her. It was for that reason that he didn't look kindly upon her. Let me repeat myself. His deep voice echoed quietly throughout the surroundings as the air around him stirred. What are you doing here? Delilah wasn't necessarily banned from Bremer, but she knew better than to come here. Unless called for, nobody wanted to deal with her. Her appearance usually required her to send a letter in advance to call upon the presence of another monarch. Only then would the royal family feel better about her appearance. No one knew what this crazy bitch would do. Delilah stood still, her face unmoved. Looking down, she raised her head slightly. Are you going to pretend like you don't know why I'm here? That's not something that should be concerning you, is it? Delilah's eyes narrowed, and her inky black irises darkened further, becoming an abyssal black color. Staring into those eyes, Joseph felt his mind sink into them, and for a moment he almost did. But it was only brief as he was quick to free himself. Who? He proceeded to glare at Delilah. We have everything sorted. Do not poke your nose into our business. You of all people should understand this best. The situation was extremely delicate at the moment. Not only were the students from Haven missing, but so were the people from the Aurora Empire. News of the situation had still not made its way out to the other empires, and things were still somewhat calm, but Joseph knew that it was only a matter of time. This was merely the calm before the storm. Once everything was revealed, the situation would turn into a diplomatic disaster. And if that wasn't all, the princess was missing as well. A large portion of the Royal Guard unit had been sent to the forest to look for any clues. These were the elites of the empire. With them working together, Joseph was even confident that they might be able to beat a monarch. Please return from where you came from. I will only say it once, you are not welcome here. If you have a problem with it, you can directly head to the main family. Delilah's expression remained unmoved at his words, and the pressure that came out of her body rose several notches. In spite of that, Joseph remained firm. He could hardly breathe, but he didn't let it show. Fine. Eventually, Delilah gave in and nodded her head. Good. Joseph sighed in relief once he saw her give in, and he was just about to speak again when Delilah's figure started to fade. He'll do as you say. He'll go meet the royal family. Joseph's expression changed drastically upon hearing his words. Wait. He reached out to stop her, but it was already too late as her figure blurred and disappeared from the spot. Joseph felt like ripping his hair out. He had only said those words to deter her from staying, but who would have thought that she would actually take them at face value? Oh no. Joseph looked around in anxiety. I'm fucked. I'm done for. He knew that he had just invited a walking disaster to the royal family. Arg. The walls had crumbled, the mosaics lay shattered, and the glow surrounding the altar had dimmed. What once made up the church had long been broken, leaving behind the remains of the once glorious sanctuary the archbishop had built. Leon stared at his surroundings without saying a single word. No, it was more like he couldn't say anything. Pain shot through his body as his hands and feet were nailed to the wooden rows. Looking around him, he could see that the others were in a similar predicament as everyone woke up to find themselves in a similar state. With a gag in their mouths, nobody was able to utter a single word. In the end, the only thing they could do was stare at the front where a man stood. "Have you all woken up?" His back was turned against theirs as he stared at the altar that was in front of him. "I'm sorry that the circumstances have forced me to do this, but after everything that you've done, I had no choice but to do this." The Archbishop's voice was extremely brittle as he continued to stare at the altar in front of him. Leon swallowed nervously as he looked ahead, and his mind froze when he noticed a presence behind him. His eyes widened at the sight of multiple people in white standing behind him. But that wasn't the part that shook him, no, it was the state they were in. Some were missing limbs, while others had ghastly voids where parts of their faces should have been. They remained standing behind him, their grotesque forms casting eerie shadows that flickered in the dim, failing light of the church. Their muddled eyes focused on him as Leon felt his entire body stiffen. It was at this moment that he understood something. He can't run. He couldn't pull the same thing he had done before. His mana was completely empty, and any action from him would spell his death. It was over for him. Leon felt his heart sink at the thought, and despair finally started to claw up from deep within him. No, not like this. Leon wanted to do something, and his mind raced as he tried to think of all sorts of possibilities. But regardless of what he tried, nothing. His mind was blank. He couldn't think of a single solution at all. No, despair had truly started to gnaw at his heart. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Leon's mind continued to race as he tried to think of all sorts of ways to get out of the situation. But his thoughts were soon broken by the Archbishop, who yet again spoke. "I wanted to take my time with all of you. I wanted the blood to enter your body naturally so that it would be diluted with your blood. But time and time again, you have all defied my wishes." Finally, the Archbishop turned around, revealing his muddled white eyes, void of any sanity. "I should have done this from the very start. I only gave you a taste of it before, since it takes several tries for it to truly be effective, but that no longer is an option." The Archbishop turned around again, and this time his gaze fell towards a certain person who sat by the corner with a tired look. Leon recognized him in an instant. It was the mysterious cadet. His heart sank at the sight of him. I was wrong about him. Leon's first mistake was ever thinking that the mysterious cadet was strong. The reality was that he was no different than the others. He had been tricked by his appearance back then due to his sensitivity over Julian's possible return. But he was wrong. So wrong. "Let's start with you. I want all of you to see what will happen to all of you shortly." The Archbishop went on to grab Emmett by the hair, dragging him forward in front of everyone. "Look," he shouted, his gaze falling in front of everyone. In his grasp, the cadet struggled with all his might as he tried to free himself from the Archbishop's grip. But it was no use. No matter how much he struggled, the Archbishop's grip remained firm. Kira, Aoife, Evelyn, Aiden, Jessica, and everyone present stared at the scene as despair slowly started to crawl up into their hearts. "It's over. How can we escape this? Will this be me? I don't want to die like this. Help. It's no use. It's over." The Archbishop spoke as if he knew exactly what they were thinking about, relishing their expression as he pressed his hand over the cadets. Immediately, his hand glowed and the Emmett stopped struggling. His body limped over and a projection soon appeared for everyone to see. "Look," the Archbishop shouted in a fanatical manner. "This is what happens when you cross me. Repent for what you've done. Pay for your sins." He soon started to laugh in a maniacal manner. "Repent." The Archbishop's words echoed throughout. Meanwhile, everyone's attention focused on Emmett, who found himself standing before a familiar white world. "This is?" He looked around him and his heart started to sink. "It's this place again." Instantly, Emmett understood the gravity of his situation and his mouth went dry. The ring of nothingness. He had fallen under its power. So, after all that, I still failed. No longer did he have any life as his blood was gone. And even if he did, once this was over, all that would be left of him would be nothing. "It's over." He slowly started to lose his expression. No, it was more like he couldn't make an expression at all. He understood that it was over. How could he get out? Emmett raised his head and looked at the white world. Unknowingly, he took a step forward and the floor beneath him rippled. "Tack, good, good, keep going." Outside, the Archbishop shouted, his expression twisting with glee. Soon you will completely lose sense of yourself." Indeed, the more Emmett walked, the more his eyes became muddled. To everyone watching, they could see him slowly start to lose sight of himself. The worst part? He could do nothing but continue forward. Slowly and carefully he continued to move. In the endless world of white he walked. But despite how far he walked, Emmett didn't completely lose sight of himself. Mainly because this wasn't the first time he had felt like this. This familiar sense of despair. I felt it before. Back on Earth, when he was stuck in his home with the cancer slowly eating away at his mind. Back then, he had endured the pain. And the same was true at this moment. Be it past, present, or future. Nothing had changed. Emmett stood alone within the white world. Tack, tack. His steps quietly echoed within the white void, ripples forming beneath each step he took. The more he walked, the more he found himself losing sight of himself. It felt as though he was slowly sinking into the depths of the ocean, darkness gradually enveloping him, embracing every part of his body in a strange and cold sensation. He could imagine the Archbishop's expression outside. It's over. You've lost. The Archbishop's voice quietly echoed in his mind over and over again. They were like whispers that reminded him of his ineptitude, of his failure. It was unfair. He never had the time to properly adjust to this world. Tack. More ripples formed as he took another step. He had long forgotten for how long he had walked for. The white world seemed endless, each step expanding the white world before him. Despair had already lodged itself in his heart. Why is it always like this? Emmett mumbled to himself while staring ahead. He never looked down and just stared ahead. He didn't want to look down. He only wanted to look ahead. Be it now or the past. Why do I always feel this way? Fighting a losing battle. It was something he was used to doing. It was for that reason that he continued to walk forward, look ahead. Because this was all he knew to do. Fight without looking back. What are you doing? Hurry up and give up. Why are you still walking? Stop your meaningless struggle and come to my side. The Archbishop screamed on the outside as he stared at the projection before him. He laughed at times and shouted at others. He seemed to be gloating over Emmett's situation. But his words were useless. They couldn't reach Emmett. Tack, tack. Within the white world, he continued to walk forward. As if entranced, his eyes flickered between muddledness and clarity. What's he doing? How is he still going? Was I wrong about him? Leon and the others stared at the scene with bathed breaths. They all didn't understand how he was still able to keep his mind clear. Everyone present had experienced the trials. They knew just how difficult it was. It was a trial with no way out. It's a meaningless struggle. Give up. The Archbishop screamed at the projection, his expression cracking out of impatience. What are you doing? Give up and stop wasting my time. Yet again, his words went to deaf ears. Emmett continued forward, his expression firm as his steps continued to form ripples beneath him. The more he walked, the more he felt his mind blank. The ring of nothingness. It was slowly starting to get to him. His mind. He was losing sight of it. The sense of despair only increased. His steps started to slow down, and his memories started to fade. He wanted to continue, but his body refused to listen. He was losing. Right, this was never a fight I could win. Just like his cancer, he was going to lose again. He fought, but the world didn't want him to win. It was as if it was laughing at his failure. Finally, the Archbishop laughed at the sudden turn of events. No one can escape the trials of the forgotten minds. It's time to give up and come to me. His voice bellowed throughout the surroundings. Staring at Emmett, the others felt their hearts sink as they lowered their heads. It's over. He couldn't resist. We're next. Everyone started to despair at their situation. No one thought Emmett would be able to continue forward. They knew that they were next. Tack, tack. Emmett's steps slowed down with each step that he took. His mind blurred, and he started to lose sight of himself. The sense of despair only heightened, and he slowed down further. At the same time, his eyes grew more muddled. Who am I? Emmett mumbled to himself. Within the blurriness of his mind, he looked down at the floor. All he could see were ripples. The ripples, they prevented him from seeing his face. He wanted to see his face, and so he stopped. No, don't do that. Everyone outside started to despair. If he stopped now, then it meant that he had given up, that he had lost. They didn't want that to happen. But it was too late as Emmett stopped completely. That's it. Some sighed, while some others lowered their heads in defeat. It's over. Him next. Ha ha ha. The Archbishop laughed in triumph. The ripples gradually stopped, and Emmett looked at his reflection. Blonde hair, blue eyes, it was totally unrecognizable. Who is he? Emmett mumbled quietly. This wasn't him. He knew this much. But who am I? He started to lose track of himself. Raising his hands, he pulled his lips up. He smiled. He cried. He shivered. He swore. He screamed. He blushed. What is he doing? Has he lost it? Why is he doing that? To those watching, it looked like Emmett had gone insane. That's it. Come to me. Ha ha ha. But to Emmett, He was just trying to see if he could see anything within those expressions. It didn't seem like it would help at all. But within those expressions, Emmett found something. His past. Memories resurfaced in his mind. Yet again, he smiled. But within a smile was something else. I didn't smile because I was happy. I smiled because I had to. He cried. Tears dripped down in the white world. Ripples yet again forming around him. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because tears were all I had. He shivered. I didn't shiver because I was scared. I shivered because I was sick. He swore. I didn't swear because I was angry. I swore because I cursed at the world. He screamed. I didn't scream because I was surprised. I screamed because I was in pain. He blushed. I didn't blush because I was in love. I blushed because of the constant fevers. His chest started to ache and heavily moved again. Tack, tack. His eyes started to regain clarity. He finally started to remember his identity. Who he was. But the more he walked, the more he realized something. It wasn't who he truly was. It was, but at the same time wasn't. His steps slowed down once more. If that's not me, then who am I? Emmett reflected deeply on the question. Unknowingly, something started to change about him. Emmett's hair started to darken, his pupils started to change, and his muscle structure started to change. All noise ceased as everyone stared at the scene in shock. What was happening? What was happening? Everyone's attention was focused on Emmett, who seemed lost in his own thoughts. With each step that he took, the clearer his gaze became. At the same time, his hair started to turn black. His eyes started to turn a different color, and so did his facial structure. An identity was starting to appear before everyone. He looks familiar. Who is he? Why does he look so familiar? But the changes weren't enough for them to recognize him. All looked upon the scene in silence. The Archbishop included, who found himself unable to utter a single word. Emmett, on the other hand, walked ahead in silence. His gaze was becoming increasingly clear, and in the distance, he could make out the faint outline of a person. He walked towards that person. The figure's features were blurred, and it was hard to tell how he looked, but Emmett knew. He knew who the figure was. It's been a while. Emmett greeted, his steps coming to a stop again. The figure stood in silence, observing him. Emmett Rowe. The figure spoke, calling out for his name. Emmett stood still for a moment before shaking his head. No, that's not who I am. The figure stood expressionless as it stared back at him. Then who are you? Who I am? Emmett looked down and stared at his reflection. His face was expressionless. Unlike before, he didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. Why? Ha! He laughed as he realized just how different his answer was from just a minute ago. My tears, they had all dried up. My body, it was tougher than steel. My curses, the world wasn't worth them. My screams, I no longer felt pain. All he had left was a blank look and a face he was familiar with. Staring at his features, he paid particular attention to the blank look on his face. It was reminiscent of a blank canvas. Yes, a blank canvas. The perfect representation of who he was. It wasn't the canvas that made the painting, but it was what was on it that reflected the painting. Sadness, anger, happiness, love, fear, and surprise. Paint was what made a painting, and emotions were what made him. Julian looked at the figure that stood before him. An image was soon becoming clear to him, but only him. Those outside couldn't see at all. They all thought Julian had stopped yet again. But that was the furthest thing from the truth. He was staring at something. Someone. Emmett Rowe. An abstract version of who he had once been. But the current him and the past him were different people. He hadn't truly realized how much he has grown since then. Right now, Emmett could look back to what he turned out to be and say, "You're amazing." The reason he disliked Julian so much. It was because he was everything that he wanted to be. He was amazing for what he had become. His efforts, they weren't wasted. The results, he had seen them through a different lens. Julian started to understand this, and memories started to enter his mind. I get it. I need to let go. He needed to let go of the past, but not his goal. His drive needed to be the same, but not his identity. He thought that he had already let go, but that was what he had told himself. The reality was that he had still clung to what he once was. Julian extended his hand, slowly bringing it towards the figure that stood before him. As he did, he took one last look at the person that he once was. Who am I? Emmett asked again. Julian remained silent. In the silence, he thought about the answer. There were multiple. Emmett Rowe, the Black Star, brother. But there was only one answer. The hand merged with the figure, and a bright light engulfed the entire surroundings. His features became clear to everyone present. His hair fully turned black, his eyes turned hazel, and his features sharpened. His appearance became clear, and the faces of those outside changed drastically. How could this be? What sort of... The light surrounding Julian intensified. It grew bright, covering every inch of the world. In those last moments, he opened his eyes to stare ahead. The world was white, but at the same time, he could see an end to it. He smiled then. Regardless of what I had once been, I am now Julian Dacre Ivinus, the one who walks the path of emotions. This was me, my identity. Julian's true appearance was revealed for everyone to see. At that moment, everyone who witnessed the scene fell into utter silence. No one could utter a single word as they stared at the lone figure standing at the center of the desolate white expanse. Gradually, they watched as the illusion before their eyes dissipated, revealing Julian with his hazel eyes fixed upon them. The projection faded, and a buzz emanated from the Archbishop's ring. Is that really him? He was here all along? Why did he act so differently, and why did he go with them? Everyone looked at Julian with lost and confused looks. Nobody could understand what was going on. In one moment, everyone was despairing about the situation, and in the next moment, Julian appeared right before everyone's eyes. The one who was most shocked was Aoife, who stared at Julian with widened eyes. How did he find out? What did he see? Her thoughts drifted towards the passages she had read in the past, and her mouth turned dry. Couldn't be that... She had long lost the words to describe the current situation. But she wasn't the only one. Julian had also lost his words as he struggled to understand what was going on. Where is this place? His memories were like shattered fragments. They continued to drift in and out of his consciousness. But if there was one odd thing that he noticed, then it was the man who stood before him. With muddled white eyes, he looked shocked as their gazes met. What's going on? How is this possible? Julian stared at the man, and finally, his memories started to fully return. Be it during the times when he was back as Emmett, and to the times after subduing the dragon's will. Things started to make more sense to him. So that's the case. With the passing of the seconds, the clearer his mind became. His body was in pieces, but he didn't need to use his body. The man before him was someone he could deal with. What have you done? What sort of trick did you use? How is this possible? The Archbishop's muttering made its way into Julian's mind as he raised his head to look at the Archbishop, or whatever he was. It was clear to Julian that this man was just playing make-believe. He wasn't really an archbishop, and no one present was his follower. All of it was due to the strange ring that he held in his hand. Right, the ring. Julian extended his hand. The Archbishop's expression changed drastically as Julian grabbed his hand. It hurts. It hurts. As if a certain force was pulling his hand, the Archbishop held onto it tightly as his face turned red. But it was no use as a glow manifested over the ring he was wearing. The ring wrenched itself free from his trembling grasp and soared through the air, landing with a soft click in Julian's outstretched hand. How could this be? The Archbishop screamed in horror as he watched the ring fly into Julian's hands. Ring of nothingness. Julian stood on the spot, unmoving. His gaze was directed towards the ring in his hand. To those watching, Julian's figure looked imposing. Standing with a stoic expression, he stared at the ring before him, and under everyone's watch, he slowly slid it onto his finger. No, the Archbishop protested, turning his attention towards his followers and commanding them. Do something about him. Kill him. Get me the ring back. But his words were met with silence as none of his followers made a single move. They stood still while staring at Julian, who remained firm in place. What are you doing? Did you not hear my orders? The Archbishop continued to bark orders as he shouted towards them. But all fell on deaf ears as none of the people moved. What are you doing? What are you? You know best why they aren't moving. Julian slowly raised his head to look at the Archbishop, who flinched under the intensity of his hazel eyes. He then raised his hand to display the ring on his finger. You no longer have this. What was it that you said before? Julian's lips slowly curled into a smile. You've lost? Haha. The Archbishop's eyes turned bloodshot as he looked towards Julian. Right, this is not over yet. I have this. Kiki. Yes, not over. In the next moment, he frantically rummaged through his pocket and withdrew several vials filled with a viscous red liquid. With trembling hands, he hastily uncorked each vial and gulped down their contents in rapid succession. Quick, stop him. What are you doing? Everyone immediately jumped at the sight as Leon, Aoife, Kira, Evelyn, and everyone tried to scream for Julian to do something. I want you to die. I want you to die. No. However, to their utter horror, Julian remained motionless, simply observing as the Archbishop's form began to undergo a grotesque transformation before their eyes. CRA crack. His body expanded, limbs elongated, and his once human features contorted into something nightmarish. The air filled with unsettling cracking sounds as bones stretched beyond their natural limits, and flesh twisted into monstrous shapes. Leon stared at the scene with bated breath as anxiety gripped him. At a glance, he realized the Archbishop was becoming incredibly powerful. "What are you doing?" Julian was displaying too much arrogance. Even in his prime form, Leon doubted he could defeat the monstrous figure emerging before them, his heart sinking at the sight. "No, do something." Aoife and the others shared similar thoughts as they looked on in despair. Their despair only worsened when they saw Julian keep his attention fixed on the ring on his finger, completely unmoved. "I'll kill you. I'll kill you." It was just as everyone was despairing that they noticed the mana in the air growing thicker. Confused, everyone glanced upward, their eyes widening in shock as several intricate magic circles materialized directly behind the Archbishop. Bang! Bang! They quickly launched towards the Archbishop, who was unable to react in time due to his growing stature. A deep growl reverberated through the ruined church, accompanied by smoke billowing from his back. But that wasn't all. More circles formed, each faster than the last, relentlessly crashing against the Archbishop's back. Bang! 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 "I will kill." His heart-wrenching scream reverberated throughout the broken church as his body writhed in the air. Just as the Archbishop was about to say something else, he abruptly stopped as blood started to seep from every corner of his body. Confused by the sudden turn of events, everyone looked towards the monster that once was the Archbishop and widened their eyes in shock upon noticing the dozen of threads surrounding his body. In his final moments, the Archbishop glanced at Julian, who returned the gaze without uttering a single word. The two locked eyes for a few seconds before the Archbishop fell forward. Thump! The ground trembled slightly as his body hit the floor. All eyes remained fixed on Julian, who stood silently. Their gazes lingered until someone finally noticed the figure standing right behind the Archbishop's body. When someone pointed it out, everyone turned to look, their expressions contorting in anger and animosity towards him. "It's the traitor. Traitor bastard. What are you doing? Only now did you finally decide to do something?" Whether from the Aurora Empire or otherwise, everyone directed similar looks of rage towards the man standing behind the Archbishop. "What are you doing here? Did you switch sides because you saw we were losing?" Surprisingly, it was Aiden who screamed, the second seat among the members of the Aurora Empire. His words echoed the sentiments of those from the same empire. "When this is over, we'll report everything to the professors and delegates. You missed your chance. You should have left quietly when you had the chance." Everyone hurled curses and slurs at Kalian as he stood motionless, not uttering a word. At that moment, everyone vented their frustrations towards him. If not for his actions, they wouldn't have been in this predicament. Kill him, beat him up, and make sure he doesn't escape. Their hatred towards him compelled some to turn to Julian, pleading with him to stop Kalian and kill him on the spot. Leon remained silent, simply observing Julian, waiting for him to say or do something. Soon enough, Julian raised his hand. Surprisingly, everyone fell silent at his action, all eyes fixed on him. They awaited his next move. "Wait." In the sudden silence, Aoife felt compelled to speak. "Think this through. This could cause complications within the empires. Don't kill him." Aoife's voice cracked as she pleaded. She wasn't speaking only for the empire's sake but also for Julian's. If he killed Kalian, the consequences would be severe, even for the princess of the royal family. "Don't. You did well." Aoife's words were cut off by Julian's voice as he spoke. A strange silence filled the space as everyone looked towards him with puzzled expressions. What did he say? What did? Yeah. "I don't think I want to do this again." Kalian's cold, expressionless demeanor softened as weariness crept in. Approaching Julian, he sighed. "I don't know if I have it in me to do this again. It'll be a miracle if I don't get in trouble." "Eh? Question marks appeared over everyone's heads as they alternated their gazes between Julian and Kalian. It was then that Leon understood something, his expression shifting. "These guys," he softly mumbled in shock. "They were working together from the start. Took me a while to piece together my memories completely. Remembering the time when I had lost all my memories was relatively easy to digest. On the other hand, recalling the events after I emerged from the Dragon Will was much more challenging. The memories were fragmented, and they weren't exactly pleasant. But gradually they too started to make sense. I see." I turned my head in a specific direction. There I met two pairs of eyes. They stared back at me with complex expressions, and I shrugged. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. Glancing at my status window, I switched to the quest log. Main quest activated. Survive the cultist. Character progression plus 385%. Game progression plus 11%. Failure. Calamity 1 plus 7%. Calamity 2 plus 9%. Calamity 3 plus 13. Indeed, the quest was still active. I vividly remembered receiving it right after entering the strange fog. My memories of that time were still somewhat hazy, but I recalled receiving the quest and the vision that accompanied it. In that vision, I saw everyone seated rows as the Archbishop prepared for the blood ritual. It was a suffocating sight, where I felt helpless watching everyone perish before my eyes. It was also in that vision that I noticed someone standing beside the Archbishop. It was Kalian. Yes, he had betrayed everyone just as he was doing now. I was merely speaking nonsense when I said what I said he did well. He had indeed betrayed everyone, and I was ensnaring him. I am now holding onto your weakness. If I could use someone, I intended to do so. Like Almighty, I planned to employ anyone who could aid my cause. So what if they had tried to kill me at one point? If they proved useful to me, it didn't matter. It made things simpler for me. It meant I didn't have to form attachments. Hey, you bastard. A voice interrupted my thoughts. Turning back, I locked eyes with someone. Her expression seemed a mix of emotions, but anger was definitely present. I won't ask you anything now, but this hurts. Would you mind? Oh right. Looking around, I saw everyone nailed to their seats and scratched the back of my head. I almost forgot. Turning to Kalian, who obediently nodded, I moved to help the other cadets. They glared at him, but their intensity had faded to confusion. Damn, it hurts. Kira groaned as I removed the nails holding her in place. She winced but otherwise didn't seem overly bothered. There. Blood stained the floor where I removed the nails. Kira quickly channeled her mana to stem any further bleeding, but she would need professional care. There were also some cadets with missing limbs. I couldn't help in that regard, and the only way was through some really expensive medicine that the Empire was probably going to provide as compensation for the situation. Or at least I hoped that would be the case. I wasn't quite sure whether they'd actually do that. Ugh, go help the others, Kira said, rubbing her neck while muttering to herself. Damn. This hurts more than I thought. Seeing that I was still looking at her, she raised her head and waved her hand dismissively. I'll ask later. I nodded without saying a word and went on to help the others. I started with the people that I deemed were in the most critical condition. Those with missing limbs or who were on the verge of dying. The blood had all been taken by the Archbishop, and thus I couldn't find a way to help them. Here, get some rest. Helping a cadet from the Aurora Empire down, I shifted my attention towards Aoife. She didn't say anything as I helped her take off the nails that bound her. Tell me if it hurts. She nodded silently as I assisted her in removing the nails. She didn't even flinch throughout the entire process, which was a little surprising. I guess she must have a high pain tolerance. As a princess, I've been trained since childhood to endure this level of pain, so that if I'm ever tortured, I won't reveal anything. Oh, that made sense. She was indeed the cadet who scored highest in the pain tolerance test. That explained it. You were gone for quite a while, so I was. Finishing with her left hand, she spoke again. This time, her words were a lot softer. It was almost as if she was scared of my reaction. In the time you were gone, I became the Black Star. Her words made me pause. Raising my head, our eyes met. You finally noticed. Aoife spoke, her gaze piercing. You act like you don't care, but you do care about the title, don't you? A little. It made things a lot easier for me. I regretted losing the title, but it was understandable. I had been absent for almost half a year. Someone had to fill the role while I was away. Besides, her strength seemed to have increased significantly. She wasn't a bad Black Star. But what about Leon? Did he decline the role? I wouldn't be surprised if he had. It seemed typical of him. Do you want the title back? Aoife's unexpected question caught me off guard. As I paused, our eyes met again. If you want it, I can give it back to you. I didn't earn the role, so you can have it. He'll retrieve it. Yeah, he'll get it back. Don't overthink it. He'll be fine. Your tone suggests otherwise. I held back those words and focused on removing the remaining nails. Why aren't you answering? Despite her persistent questioning, I continued to ignore her. She wasn't in the right state of mind. Emotions were clouding her judgment. Couldn't blame her. But deep down, I knew there was truth in much of what she said. Let's discuss it later. After removing the final nail, I wiped my hands and prepared to move on. Hey, wait. But just before I could leave, Aoife stopped me. Turning to her, I met her gaze. She hesitated, opening and closing her mouth several times. The word that she wanted to say never truly left her mouth as her mouth continued to open and close like a fish out of the water. It would have been funny had my camera been here. But it wasn't. Frowning, I waited. If you don't have anything to say, I'm leaving. A sound escaped her lips, followed by words. It's good to see you back. Taken aback, I looked at her for a brief moment. Then, registering the words that came out of her mouth, I let out a short breath before turning around. I nodded slightly. a small smile forming on my lips. Thank you. It was good to be back. Not just in terms of memories, but for my sanity. My issues, they had all been resolved. The voices had ceased, and my mind felt clear. It was an unfamiliar sensation, one I hoped would endure. It was this feeling that truly made me realize that I was back to normal. It felt really liberating. But of course, now was not the time to think about it. I should stop wasting time. After assisting Aoife, I moved on to aid the remaining cadets. Finally, I reached Leon, who appeared somewhat disgruntled. Stopping before him, we exchanged glances. Despite the gag in his mouth, his eyes conveyed his thoughts. What took you so long? His expression seemed to say, I don't play favorites. You helped everyone else before me. If you don't have favorites, you have an undesired advantage. You're imagining things. Yes, you're probably right. No, that's not what I said. TSK. I clicked my tongue. He was adept at reading my mind, too. Shaking my head, I began removing his nails. It was a quick process, and soon he was free. He was in a pretty sorry state, more so than the others, but unlike them, he didn't seem to care about his body as he started to massage his muscles. He groaned in pain several times before raising his head to look at me. There seemed to be a lot of things that he wanted to say to me. Spit it out. It was only after I urged him to speak that he finally spoke. You've been here all along. Why didn't you say anything? If I had known, I wouldn't have. Leon paused, his face twitching. Betrayed me? I finished his sentence, and he pursed his lips. No, it's fine. I don't hold a grudge. I cut him off before he could make excuses. I definitely didn't hold a grudge for what he did back then when he exposed me in front of everyone. I wasn't in the right state of mind anyway. What you saw was me, but not me at the same time. You're fine. Now I get it. Suddenly, realization dawned on Leon. You left me for last because you hold a grudge. You're overthinking. That wasn't it, but unfortunately, Leon seemed convinced of his analysis. It is, isn't it? No, it's not. I didn't know you were this type of person. Then what did you think I was? Leon frowned before eventually his face twisted. No, you're right. You're like this. Shaking my head, I turned away from him and approached the Archbishop's body. What are you doing? Leon called from behind. I glanced at him before answering. Just checking something. Approaching, I studied the transformed body for a moment. It looked nothing like before, almost monstrous. There were many questions I wanted answers to. Without hesitation, I pressed my hand against its body and activated my skill. Let's uncover your secrets. I stood with my hand on the Archbishop's body, waiting for a response. But to my surprise, my skill didn't work. Confused, I checked my arm, but the tattoo was still there. It was confusing, and I struggled to hide my surprise. I could feel the curious glances from those behind me, whispering among themselves. Why isn't it working? Is something preventing me? Suddenly, realization struck as I glanced at one of the vials on the ground. The blood. My heart raced with sudden insight. Could the blood be blocking me from reading his memories? Wait, could it also be the reason why I lost my memories? Pursing my lips, I glanced around before quickly searching the Archbishop's body. I patted it all over in search for something. Julian? Turning, I felt all eyes on me. I opened my mouth, pausing briefly before saying, Stay here and rest. I need to investigate something. Where are you? Rest. They'll be back soon. I can't promise it's safe out there. Without waiting for objections, I left. As I walked, my heart quickened. For some reason, I had a strong feeling that I was about to uncover a clue related to my sudden arrival in this world. The 7 gods. It had to be connected somehow. I didn't know exactly where I needed to go, but I somewhat had an idea. Besides the study room, according to the blueprint, there wasn't anything else that was important. But there had always been something that had been bugging me from the very start. The study room was too unprotected. It was as if the Archbishop knew that there was nothing important there and only left miscellaneous stuff. But there had to be more to what he had. There was no way he didn't have anything else with him. For example, the blood. How did he get his hands on something so valuable? The same was true for the ring. Gradually, my steps came to a stop as I looked around me to make sure that there was no one around. It's only a hypothesis, but I lowered my head to stare at the ring on my finger. Closing my eyes, I brought my consciousness in. I felt my consciousness blur. My thoughts started to fade as I felt my mind detached from my body. It was a weird sensation. I couldn't quite describe it, but it didn't feel all too different from what I felt whenever I was witnessing a vision. The sensation lasted until I felt my consciousness return, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in a familiar white world. But it was different compared to the past. Right ahead of me, I saw something that I had never seen before and my expression changed slightly. What's this? The structure stood tall. Its towering white facade adorned with massive pillars that stood by the sides, they added a sense of majesty to the place. Staring at it, I felt a certain connection with it. It was hard to explain, but it seemed to be connected to me. I could more or less tell that it was due to the fact that the ring now belonged to me. What is this place? The interior was empty. The entire hall was painted white, and my footsteps echoed as I looked around. I looked everywhere but found the place to be completely empty. I was confused at first, but it didn't take long for me to eventually spot a certain door in the distance. Within the grandness of the place, it looked small, and I soon headed for it. I had an inkling that I would soon find the clues that I so desperately wanted. Is it locked? Looking at the door, I placed my hand over the handle and gripped it. For some reason, my heart started to beat faster as I stood in front of the door, and taking a deep breath, I twisted the knob of the door. Click. A gentle click resounded throughout as the door unlocked. Oh, I felt my breath leave my body the moment I opened the door as I let go of the knob and looked around me. The room wasn't anything big and was rather empty, but that wasn't what grabbed my attention. Staring ahead, I looked towards a small podium where a book rested. A book or a diary? I wasn't too sure, but I found myself moving forward and heading towards it. It's weird. I pressed my hand over the cover, feeling the rough cover of the book. There was no title on the book, and judging from how rough some of the corners were, it appeared to be more of a diary. Flip. Without hesitation, I flipped the first page of the diary open. Immediately, my gaze fell on the first page. It was completely empty. Empty besides a few words. To those that ingest the blood of mortem, he will soon find you, back at what remained of the church. Is everyone okay? There's a few bad cases over here, but it seems like everyone is okay. That's good. Aoife sighed in relief as she looked around. Her mana was slowly starting to return, and her head was feeling a lot better. With that being said, her body was still in pieces, and she was merely running on adrenaline. Aoife put on a smile as she tried to look as calm as possible, but she was anything but calm. It had to be said that she had died several times over the past few days. She was barely holding onto her sanity by just a thread. Looking around, she could see some of the cadets looking around with hollow eyes. They weren't lucky like her. There was a chance that they had all developed some form of PTSD from all of this. Just the way they looked and how their bodies shook at the slightest stimulus told Aoife all that she needed to know. Ha! She sighed as she leaned back on one of the rows. Oi! Her thoughts were broken by a rough and familiar voice. Aoife felt her head throb. I'm not in the mood for this. Don't care. Scoot your ass over. Aoife didn't have the time to do so before she was pushed to the side. Damn it. She went on to glare at Kira, who cleaned her ear with her pinky. If only I had a licorice stick. Ha! Aoife ended up sighing again as she looked at Kira. She didn't have it in her to argue with her. She was simply too tired. So, Kira spoke while flicking her pinky. What did you think? About, the plot twist. Aoife raised her head and looked at Kira. Which on? Right, there was more than one. Kira scratched the side of her face. Well, about him being here the entire time. Do you have any idea why he did that? Aoife shook her head. She didn't know at all. She was just as surprised as everyone present by the sudden turn of events. I didn't know. Kira thoughtfully nodded. Thought so. If you had known, then you would have probably acted weird and shit. Probably stalked them. Aoife found herself at a loss for words. Yet again, she had been called that. I'm not a stalker. But she wasn't that. She never stalked in her life. She did collect information and stuff, but that wasn't stalking. No way. I'm not a stalker. Aoife repeated. This time, her tone was a lot more confident. The fact that you don't know it is crazy. Kira mumbled from the side. The way Kira looked at her made Aoife feel uncomfortable. It was as if she was saying, yeah. Fuck. This bitch has completely lost it. No, she was probably thinking that. Aoife clenched her teeth. What about you? You're not better? What in the world are you talking about? Where do you see me stalk people? You're an addict. Well, I'm trying to stop. Kira laughed. What? Is that your best insult? PFTT, that's Hila, bitch. Kira stopped all of a sudden as her eyes widened. Looking at Aoife, whose eyes were open wide, Kira's mouth opened in shock. Did you just… No. Aoife looked away, but Kira didn't let that slide and tilted her head to get a better look at Aoife's face. You just swore. The princess just swore. Kira went on to hold her head as she looked at her in total shock. From the expression she made, it looked like she had found the most unbelievable thing in her life. No, I didn't. You're not only an addict, but also delusional. Who gives a fuck? I just got you to swear. Kakaka. Kira smacked her thigh as she laughed. Her voice was so loud that she attracted the attention of everyone present. Stop. Aoife felt her face redden further as she stood up and hastily covered her mouth. Mm, mm. Her goal was to stop Kira from speaking, but it didn't take long for her to regret her decision. Did you just lick me? Kakaka. Kira continued to laugh, her laugh growing wilder as Aoife's face turned completely red. By now, most people were looking, and Aoife found herself boiling in embarrassment. Glaring at Kira, she looked at her hand which was filled with spit, and wiped it over Kira's face. Wak. Taken aback, weird sounds came out of Kira's mouth as her eyes shot open in shock. That's disgusting. It's your own spit. I don't like this. Kira hurriedly wiped her face while Aoife watched in amusement. She then went on to use Kira's shirt to wipe her hand. Oi! The two went on to bicker like that for the next few minutes. Leon stared at the scene expressionlessly as he struggled to come to terms with what he was seeing. A voice echoed from behind him. Didn't the two hate each other? Why does it seem like they're best friends all of a sudden? Turning his head, Leon looked at Evelyn, who was similarly staring at the scene with a confused expression. It was pretty much known to everyone that the two hated each other, and yet the reality seemed different. The things they did to each other certainly didn't seem friendly, but it looked like the both of them had fun doing it. I don't get it. Same. Leon replied with a nod as he stood still to watch the scene from where he stood. He had been helping the other cadets heal up while Julian left, and he tried to look for an exit but found himself unable to find it. I can only wait for Julian to come back. He seemed to be aware of it. Did you know? Coming out of his thoughts, Leon looked at Evelyn, who was staring back at him. Know what? That Julian was here the entire time. Leon titled his head. What makes you think I knew? Well, from the time that you exposed him in front of everyone in order to buy time for us to escape. Thinking about it, the two of you probably planned that. Leon felt his entire face stiffen. His heart pounded out of his chest as his neck unconsciously turned away from her. With a straight face, he soon found himself nodding. Yes, of course. I knew it. Evelyn nodded from the side. It makes sense. Why would you backstab him like that, right? You aren't that type of person, right? Feeling her gaze, Leon felt his entire heart drop, but he didn't let it show as he opened his mouth to respond. He didn't know, and yes, he backstabbed me. Unfortunately, Leon was never able to get the words out as a certain voice echoed from behind, making Leon jump with fright. Evelyn turned back to look back. Her expression changed slightly as Julian emerged from the darkness. His expression heavy as his gaze locked onto Leon's. Snake, he said. He's a snake. There was still one last problem that I needed to tackle, which was to find the exit. But where is it? I looked around. Everything was in ruins, and smoke rose from certain parts of the area. I narrowed my eyes and looked for an exit. My previous theory had been the pipe organs, but those were now gone. Looking through that area, I was disappointed to see nothing. What are you looking for? The exit. I answered, looking back at Leon. He was standing behind me with his usual expressionless look, but I could tell from just a glance that he was anything but pleased with me. I didn't blame him. I did after all call him a snake in front of everyone. The best part was that while he did betray me, I also did kill him during the fog. I was just shifting the attention from that fact so that he wouldn't bring it up. If you're looking for the exit, then it's probably there. Leon pointed towards the altar. There? I looked at him in confusion. How did he know? Was he making it up or something? You can say that I have good instincts. So he said, but I found the reasoning to be even more concerning. He frowned upon seeing the look that I was making. He opened his mouth before closing it and shaking his head. Then, with a sigh, he walked towards the altar where he raised his foot and stomped down. Bang! A powerful explosion resounded throughout as the altar collapsed from within. Leon's sudden actions caused some of the cadets to flinch directly and some to even yelp in surprise. But their expressions were soon marred with looks of surprise as a staircase appeared from within the altar. I stared at Leon in silence and he looked back at me. I wasn't sure about what face I was making, but it probably wasn't too different from Leon's stony one. So, breaking the silence was Kira, who peeked at the staircase. Should we? We should. Leon nodded before stepping to the side so that she could go in. He thought she would, but she didn't and instead turned to look at Aoife. Go. Why me? You're ahead of me. You're clearly trying to use me. Use you? No, what bullshit. You're lying through your teeth. No, that's not the case. Kira shook her head and put on a very serious expression. Aren't you the Black Star? I'm just respective the hierarchy. It was then that Aoife couldn't argue back. She seemed to want to, and her eyes fell on me several times, but I shook my head. Still your title. Aoife eventually sighed as she lowered her head in defeat. Fine. She knew she had lost. Kira had firmly gripped onto her weakness. Without looking back, she went down the flight of stairs, her back disappearing into the darkness. Kira stared at the sight with cold eyes. Just when she couldn't hear Aoife's steps any longer, she looked towards us before saying, "If she dies, we celebrate." "I can hear you." Too bad Aoife could still hear as Kira's expression contorted in annoyance. "If you can hear, then it means you're not moving fast enough. Go. Dia, go find the exit." Her words were met with silence. I stared at the two before looking towards Leon, who looked at me in understanding. "You've missed a lot since you were gone." "Yeah, it does seem to be that way." Shaking my head, I looked in the direction of the stairs before moving towards them. What are you doing? Shouldn't we wait for Aoife to die before going in?" "Die? Oh right. To find the exit." Kira didn't even attempt to fix her mistake as she dismissively waved her hand. I yet again shook my head and stepped down. "There's no need. There's nothing that can hurt us down here. The only thing I would need to worry about would be the Archbishop's followers, but they were no longer a problem since I was now in full control of them." If you say so." Kira stepped to the side and I went down. Tack. My step echoed as darkness took over my vision. Looking ahead, I caught a glimpse of a certain light in the distance and headed for it. Tack, tack. My steps continued to echo throughout the tight space as they rang loudly in my mind. I walked in silence, slowly getting used to the memories of what had happened, and within that time, the light in the distance grew brighter and brighter until eventually, I found standing in front of a narrow gap that was covered in moss and leaves. Ducking down, I crawled from beneath it and stopped when I noticed a small barrier. This must be the reason why reinforcements still haven't found us. I brought my hand forward and bypassed the barrier before going out and finding myself standing in the middle of a large forest. "We're out." Aoife stood not so far from me as she looked around with a look of relief. In the meantime, I patted my clothes which were covered in dirt. Her gaze eventually fell on me, or more specifically, the ring on my hand. "What are you going to do about that?" "This?" I raised my hand to show her the ring. She looked at it with furrowed brows, and it was there that I understood that she knew exactly what the ring was. "The royal family will probably not be happy if I hold on to this, right?" "Yes, they won't be." Aoife nodded her head without denying it. I could more or less have predicted such a response. The Ring of Nothingness was one of the most notorious rings in the world. Why would the royal family want anyone to have it? It was a walking disaster if held in the wrong hands. Your best option is to hand it over so that you won't be implicated in anything. "Yeah, you're right." Her words made sense, I knew that. "But," Aoife sighed while holding onto her forehead, "you're probably not going to do that, am I right?" "You know it." The ring was now connected to me, and it had quite the desirable features. There was no way I was going to give it over. Aoife sighed. "Even as so much time passes, you are still the same." She seemed to be complaining, but at the same time, she wasn't as she turned her head away. "You'll pretend like I've never seen or heard a thing. I was a little surprised by her actions. She looked at me briefly. "What? You saved me. Do you think I can't do this much? Plus, I don't think anyone knows about what the ring truly does. So long as I don't speak, you'll probably be able to keep it." "And you'll do that?" "That's what I'm saying." Aoife almost rolled her eyes, but I still managed to catch it. I pursed my lips before finding the corner of my lips curl slightly. "Let me thank you in advance then." "Sure. Oh, I guess no one died." Coming out from behind was Kira, who looked around before covering her face with her hand as she blocked the sun rays coming from above. Squinting her eyes, her expression started to ease as she finally showed signs of relaxation. Coming from behind her were the other cadets, who looked at the surroundings in wonder and shock. Some cried while some hugged each other. The built-up stress from the experience suddenly caught up to everyone as some even fell on the ground. Thump. I looked around me and then turned to look at the very back where Leon was. He was the last one coming, and I knew that he was probably the one who had suffered the most out of all of this. Indeed, coming out of the exit, he appeared to be limping somewhat. Still, unlike the rest, he didn't let go of himself and looked around him. He was probably thinking of what to do next. But he didn't have to do that. Rustle, rustle. Soon, the nearby vegetation rustled, and a figure wearing bulky silver armor appeared. Their armor was filled with intricate inscriptions and designs, adding a certain majesty to them. Stopping a few inches away from us, the figure looked around before seemingly coming to an understanding. Taking out a small pearl from their pocket, they quickly cracked it. Crack. A deep voice followed after. "Reinforcements are coming. You are now safe." Thump. It was then that I heard another thump. I didn't need to look back to know who it belonged to. It was Leon. He did well. Besides the betrayal, that I couldn't quite say he did well in that regard. Still, I also started to feel a sense of relief from the situation. In particular, I wanted to get a better look at the diary. Or more specifically, the records of the Emperor of Nothing. Megrail Estate. Things were tense in the Megrail Estate. "Quick. Warn the Emperor. Someone go handle her." "You go." "No." The maids and servants rushed all over the place, barking orders to one another. The entire state was in a state of a mess, and it was all solely due to the presence of a single person. Delilah V. Rosenberg sat in one of the guest rooms of the estates. She calmly drank the tea in front of her. Her etiquette was perfect, and so was her posture. She was the epitome of perfection to those who watched her from the side. But at the same time, her oppressive aura made it extremely hard for people to look straight in her direction. Therefore, many of the servants present could only look down and avoid making contact with her. Tack. Many of the servants flinched as she placed the teacup down, a tense silence filling the space. Delilah's expression changed as she put the teacup down, and some of the servants felt their legs grow weak. Oh no, we must have messed up. We're going to die. Who is the idiot that made the tea? While everyone was panicking, Delilah was smacking her lips as her face contorted slightly. So bitter. As expected, chocolate was much better. But it wasn't like she could outright ask for it. She had an image that she had to keep up. Another one of the reasons why she was banned from eating too much chocolate. TSK. Delilah clicked her tongue. Ah! A yelp ensued after, and Delilah turned her head in the direction of where the sound came from, utterly confused by the situation. I'm sorry. Immediately, the one responsible knelt on the ground and profoundly apologized with a pale face. Delilah stared at the scene with a dumbfounded look. But if that wasn't enough, please spare her. She's still new. She's young and she hasn't learned properly. Punish me instead. Please spare her. Another one joined, kneeling down with their heads lowered. Delilah stared at the scene speechlessly. What did I even do? She was so confused by the satiation, and before she even had the chance to address it, the door opened and a man entered. Cough. What's going on here? He looked sickly, but his appearance was hard to describe. He had a certain aura about him that made him look holy. Looking around the room, his gaze paused on Delilah. Cough. I see what's going on, cough. He approached her and sat on the seat opposite. It's been a while, Delilah. His smooth and crisp voice echoed throughout. I hope you've been well. And he looked around. I hope you forgive them. Delilah didn't answer and just stared at the man in front of her. It had been a few years since she had last seen him, and he was now looking rather sickly. The current crown prince and Aoife's brother. Leaning back on her chair, Delilah nodded her head. Okay. With short red hair and piercing yellow eyes that symbolized the Megrail bloodline, Gail K. Megrail sat on the opposite end of Delilah. Cough. Coughing, he covered his mouth with a tissue. Pardon me. Wiping his mouth, he dabbed his mouth a couple more times before passing it onto one of the servants. Thank you. From start to finish, his actions were refined, carrying a certain elegance that only belonged to the very top of the aristocracy. Cough. That's a little better. He turned to smile at Delilah, who sat still in her seat without saying a single thing. It was hard to tell what she was thinking with her expression, but Gail was aware of what she wanted. You want permission to search for the missing cadets. Am I right? Delilah didn't answer, but the intent behind her expression, or lack thereof, was quite clear. Gail stared at her for a few short seconds before lowering his head and nodding it. All right, I understand. He turned to look towards one of the servants. You can go ahead and tell the royal guards that our guest over here would like to oversee the situation. Using the little power I have, I would like to grant her wish. Understood. Noting down Gail's words, the servant furiously nodded their head before turning around to leave the room. Just as they were about to leave, a change occurred. Clank. The doors burst open all of a sudden as multiple figures came in. Emergency report. Wearing thin silver armor, they all rushed towards the prince, who remained seated without as much as a change in his expression. Delilah stared at the scene from the side, her brows coming to a slight furrow as the clatter of metal and the thunder of boots echoed around her. Thump. One of the guards knelt. We have something to report. Go on. Gale waved his hand in order to hurry the report. Reporting to His Highness. The cadets, they have been found. HM? Surprised, Gale's brows raised slightly. Once he was done processing the information, he turned his head to address Delilah. But it was much to his surprise to see that the seat where she had been sitting was empty. It wasn't the first time Gale had witnessed this and thus wasn't too surprised. Instead, he found the sight to be amusing. Such hurry. But above all, he sighed in relief. She's gone. With that tyrant gone, he could finally relax. Or at least he wanted to, but he soon stood up. Let's go. He walked towards the door. It's been a while since I've last seen my little sister. My current situation was a little bit difficult to describe. Standing before one of the most powerful people in the entire world, I felt like a child who was being scolded for having done something wrong. The only problem was that I really didn't do anything. I am innocent. MHM. Delilah nodded. her deep black eyes scanning every part of my body. It was obvious from the tone of her voice that she didn't believe me at all. Every time you go out something happens, she went on to say. I wholeheartedly agreed with her. This was indeed the case and I was helpless about it. But of course, just because that was the case, that didn't mean I had anything to do with it. Delilah probably knew this too. And so, the words that came out of her mouth took me aback. Jinx. You're a jinx. She repeated a lot more confidently. Dumbfounded, I looked at her at a complete loss for words. It wasn't like she was wrong, but I closed my eyes and accepted my fate. Looking around, I glanced at my surroundings. We were still in the forest, and shortly after we were found, a multitude of guards came our way and provided aid to those in need. I was relatively fine, so I didn't receive any medical care. It was also then that Delilah appeared and took me to the side where no one else was. This was how I ended up in this situation. Despite it, my thoughts couldn't help but drift elsewhere. I still need to handle that snake. He was currently talking to his own professor who seemed ecstatic by the sudden reunion, but if only he knew, I should get the situation sorted out quickly. Kalian's personality was that of a snake. He never loyally picked sides and only picked the side that benefited him the most. In this case, he was tame because just a single word from me would get him in a whole world of trouble. But that was only for now. Who knew what he would plan later? For that reason, I needed to act fast. Thankfully, I still had time and I knew exactly a way to keep him from betraying me. A certain gaze bore down on me and I was suddenly reminded of my situation. Helplessly, I looked back to Delilah. Her expression was the same as usual, but I found myself able to read it. She seemed unhappy, and so, knowing this, my hand reached for my pocket, only for me to realize my mistake. Right, I don't have anything. In the moment that I reached out for my pocket, Delilah's hand was already outstretched towards me. As if realizing as well, Delilah lowered her hand while silently mumbling, Jinx. My face twitched slightly before I changed the topic. I'm healed. Delilah blinked a couple of times at the unexpected piece of information. Then, registering it, her expression showed signs of changes as she neared me. You are healed? How? She went on to touch my face and I felt a cool sensation wash over me. Her expression changed further as she looked back at me in what seemed to be shock. Or at least what I thought looked like shock. She didn't really show it as she touched my body. How did you do it? It just happened. I was a little hesitant to tell her about the Ring of Nothingness. It was after all one of the 7 artifacts of evil. Even if Delilah was on my side, I couldn't guarantee that she would help me. Or at least, these were my initial thoughts before I ended up showing her the ring on my finger. Thanks to this. Delilah stopped to stare at the ring in my hand. Then, as if recognizing it, she looked back at me. Why is that with you? Took it from the cult leader who kidnapped us. Was it even a cult to begin with? The Archbishop was the only follower with everyone else merely a puppet of his. I didn't quite think that it was a cult. I see. Delilah nodded in understanding. Then, taking her eyes away from the ring, she looked away. Give me the ring. I will give it to you later. Okay. I didn't hesitate to take it off and hand it to her. It wasn't that I blindly trusted her, but I somewhat knew her personality well. She didn't care at all for material things. Delilah was the strongest beneath the zenith. What would a ring matter to her? It was for that reason that I didn't worry about her taking the ring. In fact, it made things a lot easier for me. It's nice, Delilah said as she took the ring from my hand and looked at it. A strange glint crossed her eyes as she looked at the ring, and for a brief moment, I started to regret my decision. She's not going to. I was never able to take the ring back as she disappeared right before my eyes. Reaching out the area she had been in, all I grasped was air. I sighed then. She probably won't take it, right? Asterisk. Following Delilah's departure, we were all brought back to Bremer under the protection of the royal guards. Nobody said a thing on the way back. Understandably, everyone was tired and we were soon escorted towards a temporary residence. The first thing I did after entering the room was lock the door and head towards the study desk where I turned on the lamp and took out the familiar diary. I didn't get a good look before, but now that I have time, I should spend some time looking through it. I had a feeling that there would be a lot of important information. There was also another reason why I locked the door. It should be soon. I looked at the quest window. Indeed, the quest was going to end any time now. I couldn't wait to receive my rewards. After all of this, I expect something. I would still be lagging behind some, but it would make me a lot closer, especially since Leon had already reached Tier 4. He was one step away from creating his own domain and catching up with the first-year professors. Anyways, I flipped the diary open and skimmed past the first page. My eyes immediately laid on the words written. I am not a tyrant. I never was a tyrant. They made me a tyrant. The first passage alone was enough to arouse my interest. From what I knew, the record stated that the Emperor of Nothingness was a cruel and merciless ruler who tried to once dominate the world with the ring, hence why it was labeled as one of the 7 evil artifacts. But perhaps there was more to the story. I touched what I shouldn't have touched, and turned the world against me. No, I turned him against me. Touched what I shouldn't have touched? Turned him against me? Who was he talking about? My eyes scanned the page faster as my mouth suddenly became dry. I had an inkling as to who he was talking about, but wasn't this something that happened a long time ago? How could it be possible? I thought it was a blessing when I found it. To be able to live longer and heal all injuries. I thought it was a massive blessing, and decided to share it with my people. But it turned out to be a curse. I suddenly felt my spine tingle as I read the text. I started to have a bad feeling about the situation. They eventually came and took everything back. They called themselves the Collectors. They took everything. From me, and from the people who had used the blood. None were spared, and in my desperation, I turned my people into what they were in order to fight back. But I swallowed my saliva and flipped over to the next page. It was useless. I still lost and barely managed to hide a few vials of the blood that I found inside of the ring. To whoever finds this and reads it, I paused, feeling my pulse quicken slightly. Don't ever consume the blood. The Collectors will come for you, and there's no escaping them. Sithras' influence is everywhere. The second page ended there. For example, Sithras. A name. I had a feeling this was the real identity of the faceless man. I didn't know what exactly he wanted the blood for, but I knew that he was looking for the sword in my possession. Was the sword also related to these gods? Just the thought of my encounters with him made my blood run cold. Still, reading the first page, there was something that still made no sense to me. If the ring was in possession of the Archbishop, then why did he still end up using the blood? And why did he not follow Mortem but another god? What was his name again? Recluse? Aurak? I pursed my lip and shook my head. He'll know soon enough. I nervously reached out for the next page, knowing that I would find an answer there. But just as I was about to turn the page, a notification flashed my vision, and a familiar sensation coursed through me. The quest. It had finally completed. Survive the cultist. You were able to overcome the event. The familiar notification appeared in my vision, and I stopped doing whatever I was doing as I looked up. Immediately, a series of notifications flooded my vision. Main quest activated. Survive the cultist. Character progression plus 385%. Game progression plus 11%. Failure. Calamity 1 plus 7%. Calamity 2 plus 9%. Calamity 3 plus 13. The first one I paid attention to was the question window, which I glanced at for a brief moment before another notification appeared, taking my attention. Game progression EXP plus 13%. Game progression 0%. 42%. 100%. I watched in silence as the bar slowly went up. Even now, I still don't know what it did, but seeing that it increased all the way up to 42%, I had a feeling that I would soon know. It was then the turn of the one area that I paid particular attention to. Character progression EXP plus 385%. EXP. It was 0%. 96%. 100%. I felt the mana inside of my body surge. The sensation was one that I had felt multiple times before, and yet still couldn't get used to. It was that good. The sensation didn't last for very long. It was over before I knew it, and I glanced at my level. Level 38. Tier 3 Magician. EXP. It was 0%. 96%. 100%. Alright, I'm not too far away from reaching Tier 4. About one level away. This was good. Especially since I had been lagging compared to the others due to what had happened with the Dragon's Will. Soon, the last notification appeared, and I held my breath. Active main quest. Prevent the Calamities from awakening or dying. Aoife K. Megrail, Slumber. Progress 7%. Kira Milne. Slumber. Progress 13%. Evelyn J. Verlice. Slumber. Progress 9%. Julian D. Iviness. I waited for what felt like an eternity. The criteria were still unknown to me. I didn't know exactly what would increase the percentage, nor did I know what it did. So far, the percentages were still rather low, and I was happy to see that none of them rose in the time that I was gone. Who knows what would have happened in the time that I was gone? It seems like everything is under control for now, but I knew that it was only for now. The situation was going to, without a doubt, turn more serious and riskier further down the line, and whatever I was seeing right now was merely an illusion to make me feel safe. So stressful. I leaned back on the wooden chair and blankly stared at the ceiling of the room. My mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. So much so that I didn't notice the subtle knocking coming from the door. To talk, it wasn't loud, and thus I wasn't able to hear it the first time. To talk, but it became a lot more clear to me the second time as I turned to look in the direction of the door. Who could it be? I didn't think it was any of the cadets given how exhausted everyone was. That meant only one real possibility. The Royal Guards? Indeed, if it was them, then it would make sense that they would come visit. At least, if they heard of what happened during the incident. I sighed again. And here I wanted to have a break. I guess I was never allowed to rest. To talk. I'm coming. Seeing how impatient the person standing outside was, I had no choice but to hurry to the door and open it. Clank. Yes, please give me a moment to change. I only just got here and I need to. My thoughts stopped at the sight that greeted me behind the door. With shoulder-length black hair, a height that was just about the same as mine, deep black eyes, and looks that could be said to be otherworldly, a woman stood in front of me with an expressionless look. In silence, I observed the woman in front of me. She looked about to be my age, but there was something about her that felt vaguely familiar. But what exactly? What? And then I realized. You. I looked at the young girl in front of me with open eyes. You're Delilah, aren't you? At the same time, Megrail Estate. Brother. Aoife walked ahead and greeted the man who stood before her. He was just like she remembered, and he seemed healthier than she had last seen him. She sighed in relief at the sight. That's good. Just a little bit longer. Aoife pursed her lips as she put on a smile. How have you been, Key? Key was the nickname her brother used to address her. I've been good. Aoife answered with a smile. She was like a completely different person than how she showed herself on the outside. This was more in line with her true personality. She wasn't originally like this. In fact, there used to be a time when all the maids feared her due to her playful nature. But that was all in the distant past. Circumstances forced her to be the way that she was. She wasn't competitive by nature, and she was rather soft-hearted, but the incident that took place a while back forced her to be obsessed with becoming stronger. It was for that reason that she was so obsessed with the title of Black Star and her achievements. The changes in her were noticeable for everyone to see, and Gale wasn't a big fan of it. You look paler than before. You're pushing yourself hard. Aren't you? It's okay. I'm only pale because of what just happened. You don't need to worry too much. Right. Gale nodded quietly, staring down at Aoife with his yellow pupils. Aoife stared back without an ounce of fear. Had it been the past, she would have been scared of his gaze, but now, not so much. He stared at her like that for a few seconds before eventually sighing. All right, fine. You win. Gale looked at her helplessly. It looks like you also no longer take me seriously. I know. Aoife's expression changed as she suddenly turned extremely apologetic. I've just grown a lot. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're saying. Her words were cut off short by Gale, who smirked at her in amusement. Still so gullible. It took a moment for Aoife to realize what had happened, and when she did, her face changed. She had been tricked by him. Her face turned red from embarrassment, and she raised her hand in preparation to hit him. She was just about to do that when all of a sudden, Gale's expression turned extremely serious. It was to the point where Aoife found herself stopping whatever she was about to do. Actually, Aoife, I want to talk to you about something serious. Yes? Aoife sat up straight. What could her brother want? Why did he look so serious all of a sudden? For some reason, Aoife found herself swallowing hard as she prepared to hear what he had to say next. Soon, Gale's lips parted open and Aoife felt her entire body tense, especially since she felt a formless, almost oppressive aura rise up from his body. It made her back tingle. He went on to say slowly, Do you have a boyfriend? It was hard to get used to the looks. I thought that I had gotten used to them, but staring at the young woman who walked alongside me, I found myself at a complete loss for words. As if her every action had some sort of magnetic power to them, the gazes of all the people in the street turned to look in her direction. Some would glance my way, but most would look in her direction. Wow, what the fuck? Is this for real? So beautiful. I could hear the whispers of those around me. Hearing them, I grew somewhat uncomfortable. Remind me again why you're in this appearance? Why not? Delilah replied, her deep black eyes looking around the bustling city of Bremer in wonder. It has been a while since I've been here. But that still didn't really answer the question. I understood her not wanting to show up in her real appearance, which was known to everyone. But couldn't she show up in her child form? That would attract a lot less attention than right now. There's a few places that I want to go that won't allow me to enter in that form. Well, that explained one mystery. It still didn't answer the other questions. For example, can't you just change your appearance like you did with mine when I joined those from the Aurora Empire? Indeed, it was thanks to Delilah that I was able to join those of the Aurora Empire with different looks. Because illusions were easy to see through by strong people, Delilah used some sort of weird skill to completely change my facial structure. It seemed like a pretty useful skill that she could have used for this situation. It's annoying. Such was her answer. Baffled, I looked at her, and could only follow from behind as she dragged me around the city. I didn't know what she wanted, but it seemed like she needed me for something. Let's go here. Delilah pointed towards a certain cafe. It looked pretty popular given the long line. I thought about asking why but gave up when I thought back to her previous answers. Looks nice. Why not? It's pretty. I just followed without question. Welcome. The barista greeted us on entry. Delilah to be exact. She may look like a younger version of herself, but her looks were undeniable. I paid the interaction no mind, looked at the board and thought about what to order. Let's see. It looks pretty expensive. The prices were what I would expect from the capital. Overpriced. I was just about to order something when I realized that Delilah was no longer next to me. Don't tell me that I lost her. When I looked around, I was relieved to see her in the sweet section. Is there something that you want? Maybe this? Delilah pointed at the chocolate cake. Yes. The barista seemed more than happy to help her as he retrieved a piece of the cake. No. But he was stopped by Delilah, who looked at the cake with narrowed eyes. All of it. Eh? Delilah raised her head. I want all of it. As expected, her obsession with chocolate and sweets existed in whichever form she was in. I approached the barista. Can we have it to go? Would you like it to go? No. Was I just ignored? By the way, are you from a big guild? Yes. The barista almost shouted. If not for the fact that I glared at him before he could do so, he probably would have. Wow. He whispered. No wonder you looked so pretty. Can I have your autograph later? Okay. I had long lost my words and made my way toward one of the seats where I finally sat down and looked outside the window where people flocked the city streets of Bremer. At the same time, I kept glancing at Delilah, who had also found her seat and was devouring her food. She was treating the slices of cake like chips with the way she was eating. She didn't even spare the crumbs that fell on the plate as she used her thumb to pick them up. I don't think you'll ever get used to this sight, but it wasn't like I didn't understand where she was coming from. Julian. Yes. Do you want some? Delilah offered. I looked at her plate and shook my head. I'm good. Do you not like sweets? No. I see, but you should try. It's good. No, and clean up your mouth. Taking a tissue, I dabbed her mouth. It was filled with crumbs. Here too. There were crumbs all over. Just how are you eating? I dabbed her cheeks. How did it get there? For some reason, I felt a sense of déjà vu. It was then that I recalled and pulled my hand away. Right, sorry. A habit of mine. It's fine. Delilah answered, looking down at the cakes. I don't mind. Fuck, I'm bored. Kira sat outside the residence with her knees squatted as she took a puff of her licorice stick. Tastes like shit. Despite the amount of time that had passed, she still wasn't used to the flavor of the licorice stick. If anything, she hated it more. But it was better than smoking, so she had no choice but to keep doing so. Why do I even do this to myself? In the end, she had pretty much already forgotten the reason why she had stopped smoking. It was just a bad habit in general, but it did help her out a lot with stress. Like a lot? Ugh, whatever. Out of habit. She flicked the stick away even though she wasn't supposed to do that. Looking at it, her lips twitched. I definitely could have made it last longer. They were expensive and stuff. Whatever. The location of the residence wasn't quite far from the city center. And after thinking about it, she decided to head towards it. She needed some fresh air, especially after everything that happened to her over the past couple of days. As she walked, she looked at her surroundings. Bremer, being the capital of the empire, was quite a bit different compared to the other cities. It was brimming with vitality, with people flocking every area she walked by as shops lined up the cobblestone streets with vendors shouting with loud voices throughout. It's been a while since I've been here. Probably been at least 5 years since she had last been in Bremer. It wasn't that she didn't want to go, but everything in the city was ridiculously expensive. A loaf of bread could go for 10 rand in the capital, which was daylight robbery. Kira had some money, but she wasn't stupid enough to get scammed by this. Suddenly, Kira stopped and looked in the distance where she spotted a familiar figure, or at least what she thought was familiar. Wearing a brown coat and top hat, she was trying her best to hide her identity, but the flock of purple hair that would slip from time to time was clearly noticeable to Kira. But that wasn't what truly caught her by surprise. What caught her by surprise was the way she carried herself. Looking around, she would nudge the end of her coat closer to her face in an attempt to hide her face. But that only made her more conspicuous. The fuck? Kira looked at the scene in confusion. What in the world was she doing? Kira was about to approach her when she noticed Evelyn stop by a food stall where she bought some food before retrieving a notepad where she jotted down a few things on it after taking a bite. She would then throw the food away before going to the next stall and repeating the process. What fucking waste. The more Kira looked, the more irritated she felt. It was to the point where she found herself grasping Evelyn by the shoulder. Oi you, Dada? Evelyn flinched at her touch. Why are you wasting so much food? What are you talking about? Who are you? The tone in which she spoke was quite deep, but it only made Kira look at her even more weirdly. You've completely lost it. Evelyn's face distorted as she made all sorts of faces. Eventually, she sighed and took off her hat. I was just tasting food. I know that. That much was obvious to Kira. But why did you have to hide your face like that? Just because. Evelyn answered, stealthily putting her notebook down. This didn't escape Kira's sight as her eyes narrowed, but she thought better of it and pretended to ignore it. All right, fine. She was just about to leave when all of a sudden a loud voice echoed in the distance. To all those present, have any one of you experienced fear before? Do you know what it's like to faint from fear? The contents were enough to attract Kira's attention as she turned her head. A crowd gathered before the speaker as a small projection appeared on his left side. Within the projection, one could see a single person walking in the dark. If you don't know, then you can come to our haunted house. If you manage to get through it without so much as flinching, we will guarantee you a wonderful surprise. Oh? Kira's eyes flicked open at the sight. Her interest piqued. Wonderful surprise? She didn't hesitate to move in the direction of where the event was happening. Are you going? Evelyn asked from behind. Kira glanced at her with an expression that seemed to say, isn't it obvious? Before heading forward and joining the crowd. Evelyn stared at her back for a brief moment before biting her lips. Fine. She too headed forward. I've eaten enough. This should be good. Delilah licked her fingers as she downed the last piece of cake that was in her plate. From time to time, her eyes would flicker towards the sweet section. I could tell that she wanted more. Does she not get fat at all? It was surprising to see her so fit when she ate so much. Or was it that she only ate sweets? Tapping her finger lightly over the wooden table, the noise surrounding us ceased. I looked around. It was quite an impressive skill, if I had to say. It was dead silent around us, almost as if we were the only two people present. And yet, I could still see everyone conversing around me. It made me envy her for a short minute. Maybe one day. I've already heard what happened from the other students. Delilah spoke all of a sudden. I would like to hear it from your side now. What happened? She spoke in a serious tone. Her whole atmosphere changed, and I could see that the current Delilah was not the Delilah I was used to, but the Chancellor's version of her. Brushing her long and silky black hair behind her earlobe, she quietly asked, there was also an item that I gave you in case something wrong happened. Why didn't you use it? About that, I scratched the back of my head. Delilah had in fact given me a small talisman before heading out of the academy. Knowing how bad my luck was, she had given me the talisman. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to use it. I lost my memories. You lost your memories? Was it just me, or was it getting increasingly easier to read Delilah's expressions? Despite the fact that she sat in front of me with an expressionless look, for some reason, it felt like I knew exactly how she was feeling. Currently, she was looking at me in doubt. She didn't seem to fully believe my words. I didn't blame her. It was certainly a weird excuse, especially since I was fine now. Yes, I lost my memories. I don't know how. It was still something that I was trying to rack my brains about. How was it possible that I had lost all my memories? Why did it happen? It wasn't something that I had purposely done to protect myself like in the past. This was an entirely new and foreign sensation to me, and I had an inkling that it had something to do with the blood that I had been injected with. Maybe I'm overthinking, but the more I thought about it, the more likely I found this idea to be possible. Delilah sat in silence for a brief moment before raising her head to look at me. If you lost your memories, then a few things make sense. Thankfully, Delilah seemed to buy my story. I knew that she couldn't detect lies, but her gaze made it seem as though she could see right through me. It was a sensation that was hard to describe, but it certainly didn't feel good. Okay. Delilah placed her hand on the table, sliding over a black ring in my direction. You can have it back. I stared at the ring in silence. Its former distinctive yellow frame, filled with intricate patterns and designs, was long gone. In its place was a black, polished finish, making it look like a cheap trinket one might find at a street stall. I took the ring and looked at it before raising my head to look at Delilah. It's black. It is. Delilah nodded with a serious expression. Glancing at it, I almost thought she was jealous of the way it looked. Why does it seem like she likes it even more than before? Now that I realized it, she really liked the color black. Was this the reason she had it colored black? Well, it works. I slid the ring over my finger and looked at it. Unlike before, it no longer seemed conspicuous and actually looked like a regular ring. This was something Delilah had done in order to make it a lot harder for people to tell the identity of the ring. Probably why she took it. Be careful with the ring, Delilah suddenly said while I was absorbed by the new appearance of the ring. Meeting her gaze, I could see the serious look in her expression. I took some time to test the ring, and from what I was able to see, there are a few limitations to it. As in, the stronger the person, the longer it takes for them to fall for the brainwashing ability. And you know this because I tried it. The way she answered so nonchalantly made me lose all my words. Seriously? There's a lot of people that are imprisoned within the Megrail estate. I went there to try it. Well, that made sense. Since they were imprisoned, they were probably not good people, so there was no need to feel guilty. But there was something that was bothering me about the piece of information. Weren't you on bad terms with the Megrail family? How did you manage to convince them to let you do that? Delilah didn't answer and rubbed her finger over the leftover crumbs of her cake. Her silence spoke 1,000 words, and I just silently accepted it. Right, I guess this must be the privilege of being strong. She could go whenever she wanted without anyone complaining. In the Megrail case, they probably just let her be since they didn't want any trouble with her. Okay, this should be everything. Delilah glanced to her left briefly. Then, tapping onto the table, the noise returned. She then proceeded to stand up. I was just about to do the same as well when she stopped me. You should stay. HM? I looked at her in confusion. Just as I was about to ask her what she meant by that, she nudged the window with her chin. That was when I finally turned my head and noticed it. Staring at me from the corner of the street was a familiar grayed figure. Holding onto an ice cream, he stared at me from the opposite end. His face was like that of a rock, as if he had seen the most unbelievable thing ever. I felt my face harden at the sight. Splat. I didn't hear the sound, but I could imagine it as the ice cream fell from the cone and splattered all over the ground, staining his shoes. Nonetheless, Leon's expression remained the same. With bloodshot eyes, he slowly brought the cone close to his mouth and took a lick of it. The most worrisome part was the fact that he didn't even notice the ice cream missing as he went on to lick the air. For how long had he been standing there for?